Lord El-Melloi II's Case Files Volume 7, Atlas's Contract, Lower, cast by Artale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Mage, Prologue. Ever since I was old enough to remember things, I knew that footsteps can convey emotion. For example, pit-pattering footsteps of a lively crowd, quiet footsteps hushed like a prayer, and footsteps that revealed a trace of sadness beneath the cacophony of noise. Since most people didn't realize how much footsteps could disclose, it was even easier to understand their feelings this way. For someone like me, who wasn't good at talking to people, a person's footsteps could tell me more about them than a conversation. My parents had two types of footsteps, one when they showed love toward me, and one when they worshipped me. Gradually, the latter began to become more prevalent. There was a fateful change around 10 years ago. In this situation, maybe you could call it fatal, the footsteps changed little by little every morning. From the day it had been announced, when the footsteps were somewhat clumsy but full of joy, to the sort of reverent footsteps that sounded like those of a devotee receiving the will of the gods. When had the aroma of bread started to send chills down my spine? When had warm soup and fresh salad start making me feel estranged? Most of all, since when had they started worrying about every tiny expression I made as I ate, making the urge to bawl my eyes out rise within me? Actually, I knew. It began sometime around 10 years ago, when my body had started transforming in an alarming way, and when the villagers had begun calling me the Blessed Child. There were already hardly any people around my age who I could talk to, and after that happened, there were none left. After my father passed away, my mother had begun fussing about my life more, managing not only prayer and meals, but also the order in which I ate things, and how I dressed. My attitude towards my surroundings was naturally influenced by her. Oh, no. There was still someone. Even in this kind of situation, I had one friend. That guy didn't have feet, so he didn't have footsteps. However, it neither ran from me nor worshipped me.
Crying again, Idiot Grey!
The box in a birdcage that always talked like this. The ceiling missed a code that had been awakened to replace all I had lost during my transformation. And now, Miss Chapter 1. See? Chapter 1. We collapsed in the narrow underground tunnel. The spotted walls and ceilings that revealed the dirt of the tunnel looked as if they could collapse at any moment, making me feel very uneasy. Though the quietude probably meant that this place had remained the same for the past couple of centuries, I could not help but get affected by its appearance.
So we're retreating first, are we?
My mentor said breathily, trying to stabilize his breathing. His gaze was directed at the person who had just joined us. A hazy knight in shining silver armor stood there. The word hazy he referred to, not only his expression. His entire figure was blurred, materializing in and out of existence. Even so, combined with his incredibly vivid and expressive demeanor, it was still generally possible to distinguish his feelings.
Of course. I wasn't good at this sort of street-fighting nonsense in the first place. The things I value most are these hands for holding pretty girls and this tongue. It's already almost a miracle that I managed to mow down enough of those impatient bone soldiers to get you two to safety.
I suppose he had to be emotionally resilient to be able to say that with a straight face. Though, we did receive his help, so I wasn't sure how to respond to what he said. When we were escaping from the bone soldiers, we had run for our lives without bothering to consider anything to arrive at this place. It seemed that there were many other paths besides the path we went down initially. We were now hiding out in one of them. I was still in a state of confusion. I would have never thought that someone like a knight would spring out from Ad even in my wildest dreams. It was simply not something I could have reasonably thought up of. I still held the giant scythe in my hands. Yet, I was still driven to the brink of collapse by terror. My mentor glanced at me from a distance before he spoke.
You introduced yourself as Sir Kay, didn't you?
You even know to add the sir.
Of course, Sir Kay. If you're referring to the adoptive brother of King Arthur...
Though it was something I had already realized, I still almost yelped in surprise. The legend of King Arthur, The famous British tale of a holy sword and a round table. The original legend behind the story of knights, full of countless adventures and romance.
Hearing those words, the knight gave a tack.
Well, what a pity it must be that I'm the one who's here. Though, when it comes to legends, it's inevitable that the reality'll be a letdown. After all, aren't the even stars in the night sky just lumps of rock anyway? Though some people probably think that it doesn't matter as long as they shine. But I'm not interested in that sort of boring nonsense.
He frowned displeasedly. Every movement of his made me confused and agitated. I knew these movements. Though I recognized them, they were not the same from what I remembered. Even so, some part of me was sure that, though they were different, they came from the same place. The contradiction between what I felt and what I remembered made me feel uneasy.
Servants summoned by the Holy Grail will receive knowledge of the present from it. So servants not summoned by the Holy Grail will be given knowledge of the present by the world.
Ah, you mages are always so full of garbage. What, will bookworms fall out of you like an old book if you get shaken too hard?
Possibly.
Seeing my mentor's somewhat serious nod, the knight shrugged even more unhappily.
Though, that answer only gets 30 points. I'm not even a servant, much less a heroic spirit. Because I didn't come from that throne or whatever you call it, the world doesn't give a crap about me. The stuff I brought up before all came from the knowledge of that stingy idiot of a sealing mystic code.
He corrected. That last sentence had the most impact on me. The words that had been stuck in my throat for the past while finally erupted forth in a yell. I couldn't even wait long enough to stand up, so I moved towards him while still hugging my knees. It's not responding to my calls. Is it broken? It was probably the first time in my life that I had forced someone I had just met to answer a question like this. However, all of my fear had been shoved to the back of my head as I approached the knight in silver. The knight extended his hand and knocked on the giant scythe with a thud.
It's not broken.
As he said that, the knight, Kay, shook his head. It was impossible to explain just how relieving that answer was to me.
Though, the functions have stopped working temporarily. After all the magical energy stored up in there was probably all used up to get me to materialize. Of course, the other reason why it managed to work was also because of the environment here.
I whirl. It stopped functioning. Worried I held onto the scythe tightly and swallowed. How long was this temporarily? Was it a day? A month? Maybe a year? Or perhaps even longer than that. However, it seemed that not even the knight knew the answer to this question. Though it was the question I wanted to know the answer to desperately, I forced myself not to, and tried to find a more meaningful question to ask. I had mountains of questions, so I had to choose a few useful ones out of them. Then, why would you get summoned from Ad?
The mage over there's already figured it out, right?
He tossed the subject over. My mentor did not reply immediately. After carefully considering his hypothesis, he spoke.
You were the personality model for AD, yes? Personality model in this case also includes specific physical and equipment conditions. After all, the personality of someone is not completely dependent on their mind. Though, the reason why anything can materialize this way is puzzling. It's done.
Pretty much, yes.
Personality. Model.
Basically, this.
The knight said, pointing to my dot. That meant that he knew the truth behind the lance, but I guess this was obvious since he had been summoned by Ad, the holy lance from Gumenad, the lance once used by King Arthur, a noble phantasm on par with the holy sword Excalibur.
Actually, I'm the personality model used for the mystic code, meant to seal the lance, so I was sent here originally with the lance, and that guy's corpse.
Continued the knight, somewhat irritatedly.
And then, when they were sealing the lance, I was chosen as the related person with the most compatible personality. It was just that I was different from those other knights' idiots, because I didn't care about all that mystery nonsense. Only those idiots would try to break a seal just because it was there. That sort of guy should be shoved into the ground for as long as possible.
I could only understand about half of the knight's words. He was probably discussing the king he once served, King Arthur, To him, that person was his adoptive little brother, or, according to the legends of my hometown, little sister, though their relationship seemed to be quite complicated.
I don't know what ended up happening to that guy's corpse. That Glastonbury place did say that the body's there, perhaps there might even be something behind that. As they say, once something gets worshipped, meaning gets added to it. Since she was originally protected by the island itself anyway, there's really no need to have just one burial place,"
said the knight in a light yet solemn tone. However, it made my heart feel heavy in my chest. Every word he spoke was like the toll of a knell from the distant past. Perhaps this was because I had come into contact with it before. The fragments of the nights, including Sir Kay, that I had heard when I undid the Seal of 13. This is a battle for survival. Approved, Kay. My thoughts belong to myself alone. Even if I had heard his voice then, I could not impose that onto him. Even if I told him that I had been encouraged by his voice before, it was the person who stood in front of me now who I needed to face. I carefully considered my thoughts, and then raised my head to look at the knight. Just then, my eyes met with those of the knight.
"Though you really look quite like her."
Huh?
"Never mind. Pretend I didn't say anything. Similar, but different. Yes, completely different,"
he said to himself, nodding. Was there a resemblance or not? Of course I knew who the knight was referring to. After all, I had always been compared to that person. Do I look like...
A person's appearance is not simply determined by their face. Not a single other person will be like that guy, not even in 100 years. Perhaps someone who bears some speck of resemblance might appear in a millennium.
After he finished his sentence, the knight limbered up his shoulders.
Returning to the subject, you two just want to get out of this mess as soon as possible, don't you? I'll be with you until you do. After all, I was only summoned by that guy to do this. Though the working conditions are hardly ideal, it's endurable, since it's only for a while.
You say that we're in a mess. Is that because you already know of our experiences?
Hearing my mentor's question, the knight responded huffily.
Of course I know. You called it the second cycle or something, didn't you?
The second cycle. Because of Zephyr, we had been removed from our original timeline and placed here 6 months ago. Though I still didn't know if it was really the past, it was definitely similar. That time in the past when I had just met my mentor.
Did you also learn of this through Ad?
Yes. It's too complicated to explain in detail, but that box basically knows everything that Kid sees and hears. That information is also shared with me.
I have one last question. What exactly is this system of tunnels underground?
Sadly, I don't know anything Ad doesn't know. I've never been brought here in my past life either, though I suppose you could call it the true Blackmore graveyard.
His low, somber voice settled into the cold darkness of the crypt.
Composed by Salfordis, Conzenatalices seats.
Her thoughts quietly resounded in the cave. The masked girl sat in the middle of the cavern. Strange soldiers of bone surrounded her, as if they were protecting her. Though the scene was jarring enough to be something out of a horror film, it gave off an odd sense of loyalty and sincerity, as if it was part of a story of knights in ancient times.
What happened, Process?
To her question, a couple of bone soldiers clacked their teeth together. Though no words were exchanged, the girl seemed to gather some information from the actions of the bone soldiers.
A knight in silver armor appeared.
The bone soldiers began to move. They scattered into the bifurcated tunnels in small groups. Though it was a mystery as to what they were, these soldiers comprised only of bone and magical energy seemed to have minds of their own. The masked girl still sat atop the rock. The armor that entwined with the rock resembled a flower of iron. If so, perhaps the boulder beneath her was her throne. If those bone soldiers were her knights, then she could indeed be called a queen, the queen of the underground. In the past, perhaps she would have been the queen of the underworld.
If she does manage to escape, then let her be.
It was a sound that was as raspy as the scraping together of stones, as if someone who hadn't spoken in years was forcing their vocal cords to produce noise.
Escape somewhere far, far away, where no one can reach. If that place really exists, escape all the way to that ever-distant utopia, Avalon.
Though that sort of place doesn't exist at all, especially for you and I.
Her words seemed almost like a prayer. The low voice echoed through the cavern. Just as even its echoes seemed to fade into the darkness, there was a thud. The masked girl turned. It came from the direct opposite direction the soldiers had gone in.
What is it example is that so? I've heard that the church has been watching this place. Are they also starting to act now?
The girl in the mask reacted as if she had anticipated this long ago. For that reason, her next words were said quickly, as if they were the results of calculations completed many years ago. There was almost even a trace of boredom in them.
I understand. If that is the case, I shall follow the ancient contracts and vow to expel them from here.
A warm, moist wind blew through the underground tunnels. After that, the conclusion was cast. The setting sun hung low on the horizon. In the wash of crimson that dyed the mountain red, a group of people were at work in the village. The church was at the center of this flurry of activity. This place, which had been sequestered in tranquility throughout its long history, had suddenly been invaded by a completely different atmosphere. First of all, the door had been broken down. The stained glass panes next to it had also been smashed. The holy water font looked like it had been struck by a blunt object, while plates and censers had been swept to the floor. Everything that had been brought in from outside of the village had been destroyed, as if the original form had finally been revealed. The one who stood at the barely intact pulpit was not the priest.
I see.
The raspy voice travelled through the church. After a few seconds of pause, the old woman raised her head. It was the person who the villagers called Granny. Perhaps you could call her the leader of the village. A large number of villagers had gathered in front of her. It was around double the number that would come here for Mass usually, though the atmosphere now was completely different from what it was usually like in the church. No, perhaps you could say that the villagers had finally shown their true colours.
Listen carefully. The fragments of our great king have finally reached a decision.
The villagers cheered to that, as if the old woman's words were prophecies from a god. It was the reason why they had gathered here. The normalcy of the village was all just a disguise. They had been born for this singular purpose ever since tens of generations ago. Everyone was extremely glad that they had been born in this era to witness Gray's transformation. The middle-aged person who had been the owner of the equipment shop hefted their sharpened hoe. The cook who always dozed off while running the only restaurant in the village now sharpened their treasured dagger. Everyone smiled at the thought of that girl. Everyone was as happy about that girl's growth as if she was their own child.
You all understand, yes. Go and greet our great monarch, the once and future king. The time has finally arrived.
The old woman instructed. The church was completely silent. However, everyone was practically shaking with excitement. They carried a strong, almost fanatic sort of will. This group of approximately 100 people was so united in their goal that they could now be seen as a singular giant creature.
We must not let her leave this village. Magdalena.
The woman whose name was called quietly walked up. It was Gray's mother. As if she had only just remembered that it was her own name, she raised her head happily.
Have you found Gray?
Yes, we know her approximate location.
She said that with a smile. Behind her, there was the sound of dripping water. The dark red liquid formed a pool, and its foul scent spread in the summer air. The messenger from the church hung his head and did not move. Blood still flowed from the wounds on the hanged man. This sort of torture, which not even trained people could withstand, had been completed by Magdalena herself.
Eliminate them, just like how we battled for our independence back then in these mountains. Roar, for this land is our holy land, which none can invade. No one shall hinder the descendant of our great king, who we have longed for since days of yore.
Suddenly, the old woman's expression softened. She raised her wrinkled hands. The light of the setting sun that streamed through the shattered stained glass windows dyed her hands in a bloody red.
We swear this upon our Holy Mother.
The black-dyed statue stared down at them with the same expression as always.
There's something that I'd like to make sure of while we're at it. What did you do during the time between the last half of the 3rd day and the 4th day of the first cycle?
This question made me cry out uncontrollably. The knight stared straight at my mentor with his hazy face.
You don't remember? Didn't you say that you inherited Ad's memories?
Unfortunately, there's nothing in Ad's memory about what happened after the 3rd night. The memories stop after meeting the guys at the church, returning home, and eating dinner. I'm afraid that Gray's food had probably been drugged, because Ad's consciousness is in tune with Gray's every time this one goes to sleep or loses consciousness. Ad enters a similar state. The people from the village know this.
Wait. You say they drugged her.
You're really asking that now? It's exactly like I said. The villagers aren't those Mo girls that I like. They're not afraid to lay fingers on little Gray here.
My mentor's shoulders shook slightly. He knew, of course.
The reason why he hadn't looked deeply into the events of the 4th day when we met and went over the events in the first cycle was because he was afraid of touching on anything that might evoke my psychological trauma. When I first left my village, I had detested discussing anything related to it. I wasn't even curious at all when I heard that they had discovered the corpse of someone who looked exactly like me. I had completely averted my eyes from my village and never considered thinking about what happened the last day before I left. I thought that since I wasn't there anymore, I should just leave everything behind and start anew with London and the clock tower. If it wasn't for my mentor or the members of the El-Melloi classroom, including Rains, I would have never considered returning to this village.
This village was always like that sort of a place. The sole purpose of this village is to transform Gray into a replica of King Arthur. To think that entire generation spent who knows how long on this kind of boring thing. It wouldn't even suffice to call it a grudge. Though the idea of a family business sounds pretty good, there's just no point to doing this sort of thing.
The knight begrudgingly said, revealing what we had known all along in an instant. I had always known this. However, my mentor froze briefly in response to that, which was undoubtedly something worth being happy about. Most people who dealt with mystery completely disregarded common practices in the rest of the world. No, it was that they didn't care about those things in the first place, like all the mages I had met so far.
Hey, Gray, do you really remember nothing? Though the drugs would have made your consciousness become blurred, you must remember something. Even if you really are a forgetful idiot, there must be information hidden in the nooks of your brain, right? Is the reason why you avoided anything related to your hometown after you left?
His sharp words made sparks fly in my mind.
Worried Gray.
I stopped my mentor, who wanted to rush over to me, and used my other hand to clasp my head. Indeed, though I was only half awake then, I still had a trace of consciousness. Yes, though my senses were blurred, the smell I had smelled then still lingered in my mind. It was the smell of rotting weeds and water, a miasma that made me feel like my throat was going to rot as I breathed it in. There was no place in the village that was like this. However, I did know of one place. It's the swamp. My mentor's voice seemed so distant. The senses from my flashback had shaken my brain. I did experience this. This receptor body did process these fragments before, but they had disappeared from my mind. I desperately tried to drag those fragmented memories out like a spinning wheel, but as soon as I managed to pull some out, it disappeared like sea foam. That's right. I saw... What? That was all I could recall. The doors to my sealed memories were still locked. A couple of rays of light shone from the gap between them. I gathered the scattered fragments to my memories. Suddenly, an image flashed through my mind. No, it was a sound. It was a loud, piercing shriek, as if hundreds of ravens were cawing at the same time. To my side, someone was yelling at me. You did something to... me. The one who lay in a pool of blood. In the midst of the crows, the other, covered in blood.
So worried Gray.
If it wasn't for my mentor, I might have actually collapsed.
So that's the reason why you didn't want to return to this village. Both you and Ad'll get nothing out of being too kind. If you make her have a dream, or something like a mage, maybe all this could be solved.
Worried, it's not like I haven't thought of that. Though entering the consciousness of someone battling with emotional trauma can alter their minds significantly. Besides that, mages have obligations to care for their students.
That's why I say you're too kind, nerd. So, after what Gray just described, she was handed over to you?
On the morning of the fourth day, Berzak came to me with an unconscious Gray in his arms. He told me then that this girl was now in my hands, that her corpse had been discovered near the Black Madonna, so nobody would try to follow us, and that I shouldn't ask about anything else. That way, she would be saved, and I would have gotten a gravekeeper of Blackmoor Graveyard.
I see. So you were completely out of the picture during the first cycle. Though if I just leave it be, it might go the same. Unfortunately, I've already boarded this boat. Then again, even if the results are the same, it still can't be helped. On that note, according to what you said, did something happen between Bersac and the villagers? Did Bersac steal Gray over from the villagers while they were planning to perform some sort of ritual on her? Or did another similar incident happen?
I don't know. I didn't ask him back then.
Just as my mentor finished his sentence, the knight suddenly put a hazy ear up against the wall of the tunnel.
Well, this is bad.
Worried what happened.
Worried someone's coming in this direction.
He stared at the darkness. I stood up nervously. I held on to the scythe form of Ad tightly. Perhaps it was because he cared for me that he stayed in this state. At least I could fight this way. At least I could protect my mentor. However, my will to fight dissipated when I saw the person who approached.
So you're here?
My mentor's Maycraft light illuminated a sturdy figure. Though he was old, he still held a giant axe in one hand with ease.
Oy! Isn't this too much of a coincidence? This is what you call speak of the devil, isn't it?
Mr. Bersac. Worried, I felt my throat go numb for an instant. I didn't know what emotions I was meant to face him with. In the time I spent at my village, he was the only person who treated me like a human being. Just like Kay had said just then, other people saw me only as the body of King Arthur. At least he was the only one who saw what I was and still raised me as the next gravekeeper. He even handed Ad, who once belonged to him, to me, Bersac Blackmoor, the inheritor of the Blackmoor lineage, and the true gravekeeper.
There's an extra one, surprisingly. If you'd excuse my rudeness, who might you be?
What a bother. The situation seems to have gotten more complicated. Just like I told these two here, just call me Kay. You don't have to introduce yourself. I know you incredibly well, and I don't want to hear another man introduce himself seriously.
The knight shrugged nonchalantly.
Kay? As in Sir Kay?
So you're also going to add the sir.
The knight sighed as if he'd had enough. Even so, one hand remained on the hilt of his sword, and he did not let down his guard. If he saw Bersac as an enemy, that blade would probably slice through the gravekeeper in a flash. Or maybe, like the knight had said, perhaps his silver tongue would be faster than his blade. Bersac turned to look at the scythe in my hands.
Did you come from inside Ad?
As only can be expected from an old friend. Your guess is close enough. That guy managed to breach the defense mechanism and forced a spiritual origin on me. Either way, that's how I ended up here, babysitting.
Worried, I could not fully process this situation. I originally thought that there would be bone soldiers, but I had made mental preparations to face the villagers. I never could have thought that the first person we met was him. However, my mentor walked forward and stood in front of me as I struggled to figure out what to do.
Are you our friend or our enemy, Mr. Bersac?
He asked carefully. Extreme tension seemed to crush even the air in the cave. Just as the tension was about to reach its peak, Bersac turned.
Follow me.
His shoes clumped against the stone, and the sound of powerful footsteps resonated throughout the cave. I had followed after these footsteps for many years, but as I walked forward out of habit, my mentor reached out and stopped me.
Could you please first answer my question? If the two categories of enemy and friend aren't appropriate, could you at least first tell us the information you have?
You should have guessed it all already.
Guesses are not the same as confirmed intelligence. Wasn't the appearance of Sir Kay just then a surprise to you as well?
I see, so there has to be some form of basic confirmation. Right. Right now, both the church and the villagers are looking for Gray.
Both of them? Does that mean that the goal of the church differs from the goal of the villagers?
Of course. Then, as the gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard, is your goal also different? To a certain extent, it is the same as the villagers.
I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Was this person my enemy or my friend? I had probably spent the most time with this gravekeeper than with any other person. Was it possible that this person was also one of those who gave their lives to transform me into a replica of King Arthur? I thought that I might go mad from how tangled the situation was.
Why are the villagers looking for Gray?
Why are you still asking this question at this time, Lord of the Clock Tower?
His voice sounded incredibly stiff, perhaps because of the question that my mentor just asked.
I've already heard something similar from talking to Sir Kay. He said that the purpose of this village is to transform Gray into a replica of King Arthur's body. However, I don't think that this is their goal. If there was no purpose to creating an identical body, they wouldn't have retained this will for generations.
He arranged and ordered the mysteries that had piled up as if he was moving chess pieces.
I do have a theory. Many additional things have been mixed into the legend of King Arthur. Even the Holy Church and the Clock Tower have their own inputs on the situation, so it's almost impossible to find out what was part of the original legend. However, there is one very famous part. The words "the once and future king" are inscribed on her grave.
My mentor glanced over at Sir Kay and continued.
I'm not sure what the once and future king is supposed to mean. Usually, I would assume that it was because she was a beloved king. It's a legend about a wise, just ruler who will one day reappear to save her people in times of crisis. Similar stories that imply the desire for a savior appear all over the world, and it's only natural, since it's a rather simple wish.
He continued, as Basak remained silent. Hearing my mentor's words, a strange expression appeared on the knight's face. What emotion did he hide under the hazy face, I wonder? What sort of comment would someone give on the lord they had served under 1,000 years ago? Regardless of whether or not King Arthur was really the hero the legends described, he must have emotions that are difficult to describe. Because it'd be like if someone was talking to a person who they'll never get to see again. No matter what they do, they'll never be able to undo past mistakes, and the tragic result will torment them forever. No matter how many times they come up with alternative words they could have said then, or things they could have done, and no matter how many alternate correct answers they came up with, all their efforts are ultimately meaningless. In the end, all they can do is watch everything unfold and fall apart before their eyes. That was also the reason why Faker was angry, wasn't it?
Therefore, all the villagers are all desperately hoping for the king's return, the once-promised return of the once and future king.
His whispered words made me inhale sharply. The once and future king, what a glorious phrase, overflowing with majesty and hope, and yet, those same words were driving me to my doom. After hearing all this information, even a fool like me could anticipate what was to come. Mr. Bezac, I saw the masked person with those bone soldiers.
You saw her?
Per Sac's expression tightened. Though I had been with him for a very long time, as we would be in the graveyard regardless of rain or shine, I had never seen him have such an expression. Worried who is she? Does she live underground? No. Is she a replica of King Arthur, like me? He did not respond immediately. Even so, I could not back down now. I could hear the sound of his teeth grinding in the silence. In the next instant, Bezac whisked around suddenly.
Like this?
He swung his axe. The heavy mass of iron cut through the air, slicing a couple of strands of my hair and shattering the bone soldier that had crept up behind me. The gravekeeper pulled his axe from the pile of bones and shrugged.
Now I'm also one of their targets.
I suppose you'll have to suck it up and deal with it then.
Kay whistled lightly. Basak stared at him.
It's impossible that you didn't notice that. Were you testing me?
Of course. It's a lot easier to figure out things like this as quickly as possible before the relations start getting complicated. Only a masochist or a really cold-blooded person would enjoy being around someone you didn't know was an ally or an enemy.
In other ways, Kay was observing how Basak would deal with the bone soldiers. The knight, who just had his ear to the wall, looked up.
We'll have to talk later. I think they heard the sounds just then and are now scuttling over.
Soon, I also heard that noise. It was the sound of scraping armor and clattering metal, which was unmistakably produced by the army of bone soldiers. My mentor tensed up, while Basak lifted his axe again.
Do you not plan on using that sword?
Basak asked the knight.
No, I'm only here to babysit, so I'm going to avoid physical labor as much as possible. Though I'm no amateur, the air has been flowing that way for a while.
The knight turned his head and looked toward the twisting tunnels. Sir Kay?
Though I'd very much like to forget it, that obnoxious idiot of a court magician did once say that the best tactic is always to escape when possible.
He turned around and immediately started running. The sudden escape shocked us all momentarily, but a horde of bone soldiers flooded in immediately from the opposite direction.
Move.
Basak slammed his axe onto the cave wall with great force. The extreme might of the blow destabilized the foundation, and dirt clods began crumbling from the walls and raining from the sky from the point of impact. Just as the 3 bone soldiers in the very front of the group were buried by dirt, we followed after Kay. The bone soldiers, who had been disoriented in the collapsing tunnel, quickly recovered. They gave up on rescuing their fallen companions, and a couple of them raised their sledgehammers to open a path through the obstructed tunnel. Since they had received orders from their master, they didn't even consider retreat. They could not tire, so they could only advance. They knocked at the dirt wall with their iron hammers, not caring if they accidentally hit their fallen companions. Their coordinated movements made them feel like automatons specifically designed for this purpose. However, after a few seconds, their movement stopped.
It was hard enough already chasing them there, but I never thought that they would have collapsed the entire tunnel. I was so close to getting her.
The bone soldiers turned silently. Perhaps they had some way of judging the power level of the people around them, as their mysterious systems had probably started shooting sparks of confusion. A woman clothed in pure black stood in the equally dark tunnel. There was a splatter of freckles barely visible on the sides of her nose. Her eyes were the colour of tea, and her body seemed out of place for an ascetic nun. The bone soldiers did not know the name of the person whom the surface world called Illumia. The wink she tossed at them was, of course, ignored. One of the soldiers charged up to her and swung its sword. The strike seemed as if it was strong enough to sever the head of someone just by brushing past it. However, the nun dodged the blade deftly and performed a backflip. For a moment it was as if a crescent moon had risen in the darkness. The spine of the bone soldier was pierced by her flying kick. With that, the nun leapt up again and performed another gravity-defying backflip. With the full force of her body, her foot fell upon the other bone soldiers. The instant she hit the ground, she swiftly crouched downward and performed a sweeping kick. She then stomped down on the ribs of the bone soldiers, who she had just tripped. She was alarmingly strong. Her flexibility and agility resembled that of a carnivorous beast. Her balance could be regarded as the limit of human capability. In an instant, her limbs were covered in grey armour. Purple tendrils of electricity emanated from the surface of the armour. Perhaps it was because of the spell had been imbued into it, the old pieces of paper that could be seen between the armour plates. The bone soldiers, which did not react at all to regular attacks, did not revive themselves after being struck with attacks enhanced by the armour. It was one of the pieces of equipment used by the exes of the Holy Church. Its name was the Ash Lock. Of course, even though they were easy to use, they still held devastating power. The nun beckoned them forward. She straightened and stood in the stance of a boxer. The 5 remaining bone soldiers charged over in a line. There were 2 each on the left and the right, and another jumped from the back and attacked from above. In order to confuse their opponents, they created subtle differences in how their movements were coordinated, a skill that only an experienced soldier could pull off. The nun hummed a light tune and took a step forward. Electricity struck exactly 5 times.
Ah, sorry, that may have been overkill.
After her apology, the skulls of the 4 soldiers shattered, while the last bone soldier, who had taken an uppercut, hit the ceiling. Fragments of bone rained down. El-Melloi impatiently brushed off the pieces that had fallen onto her and laughed coldly, turning around. Soon, the light of a lantern appeared behind her.
Aren't you a bit too slow?
Ha! Even if you say that,
said the almost spherical priest huffily, with one hand braced on the wall as he looked around. Only scattered fragments of bones remained.
you did this, right?
Isn't that a pointless question to ask? The very existence of these undead is blasphemy towards the Lord. Dust to dust and ash to ash, how could I tolerate things that turn against the will of the Lord like this?
The nun said displeasedly. Of course that was part of the reason. In the context of regular religion, she was most certainly right. There was hardly any room for rebuttal. Father Fernando narrowed his eyes. It was hardly noticeable.
All right, Jimmy to catch up, Father Fernando.
With a thump, Sister El-Melloi punched her fist into her palm and jerked her chin in the direction of the tunnel. As we advanced, the tunnel became increasingly narrower, and I felt more and more like we were walking down the cavernous maw of a beast. Beads of sweat seeped from my skin in the damp air. Since we had not suffocated, the air must not have been completely stagnant. However, it felt that way with the sweltering heat. Did this tunnel form naturally? I didn't know. Though there was an entrance into here from the crypt, it was hard to imagine that something as large as this was built in ancient times. Though it is doubtful to think that no work was done here at all. There was an air of artificiality here. I didn't know if it was the intent of the Creator, but malice seemed to ooze out from this place. For that reason, every time I took a step, I felt a chill down my spine as if I was being swallowed into someone's internal organs. Bazak spoke up as we walked in the small underground tunnel.
If the goal of the villagers is to sacrifice you, then the goal of the church is to kill you.
To kill me. Though I had guessed as much, I was still rendered speechless when I heard him speak with such certainty. It was a world that had built itself up around me. It had swallowed up many thoughts and interests and stretched impossibly far, like a spider's web. Somehow, it had become so complex and entangled that nobody could see the whole picture anymore. However, I think that I can understand it somewhat now.
The church and the villagers have always watched each other. It's been this way for a very long time. The sources don't agree on the relationship between King Arthur and religion. To the central powers of the Holy Church, it is unquestionably heretical. There isn't a chance that they will approve of her resurrection. Though, having said that, there aren't people in the Holy Church immoral enough to destroy an entire village because of an incomplete ritual that they don't know the impact of yet. At the same time, in the villagers' perspective, though they will never give up on their goal, they have no motive to oppose the church for the sake of a goal they saw almost no hope of achieving. The result was a situation of mutual surveillance, and it's been this way for centuries. Because of how long it has been, both sides have let down their guard somewhat, making this village seem like an ordinary one at first glance.
It does feel like something the Holy Church would do.
Worried, I also thought vaguely as we advanced in the dark, twisting tunnels. If that was the case, on the first cycle, did the people who killed me come from the church? Worried my mentor's face dimmed, perhaps because he was contemplating the same question.
Then who is the masked girl?
Hearing this question, Bazak bit his lip and responded after a few seconds of silence.
Since you're a lord, you're aware of the three elements of human beings, yes?
Of course, the body, the mind, and the soul. Each part is an indispensable part that constitutes a human being. Simply a pile of proteins and fat will not create a person. A person is only a person when these three elements are bound together.
My mentor said. I remembered hearing something similar before in class. I think it was when he was commenting on a student's report. It was the analysis of the existence of human beings from the perspective of magecraft.
Then that saves me the effort of explaining. You already understand that Grey was the result of an attempt to recreate the body of King Arthur, yes? After many centuries, the village has finally created an irreplaceable fruit of their labor.
What Bazak said was obvious. It was exactly like he said. I was an imitation of King Arthur. I had become who I was now 10 years ago, an approximation of an ancient hero and a living sacrifice. If that was the case, then she was...
The masked girl is the result of a recreation of King Arthur's mind.
Mind? I couldn't help but exclaim. Was this kind of thing really possible? I was the body. It was comparable with a pair of identical twins. They would have the same face, the same lips, the same hands, and the same nails. That was what it was like in terms of physical appearance. Of course, there were also genetic factors, and maybe even other things like gut bacteria. But what about the mind? Can you really recreate that kind of thing?
Hey, isn't there an example of that right here? Oh, dearest explorers, your forgetfulness is ever heartless,
Said the Silver Knight, shrugging exaggeratedly.
The mental model of Sir Kay.
My mentor muttered. The Silver Knight that was the basis for Ad's personality. After thinking about it, wasn't it the same technique used to create the masked girl?
This technology existed before in the past. The recreation of someone's mind or body to create what is essentially their doppelganger is part of the residue of the Age of Gods, or perhaps even the unreachable realm of fairies.
Huh, you even know about this, impressive. Now there's copyright or whatever you call it, but it wasn't there back then. We could replicate whatever we wanted back then. For instance, when I got chosen because of my personality, they never even got my consent.
The knight laughed. Grimly. I was unsettled by his words. But Sir Kay was the personality basis for Ad, the scythe in my hands. This, I knew. Though they talked and thought about different things, some parts of them made me think of them as the same person. Ad and the knight were similar, almost like two flowers sprouting from the same branch. Exactly how similar are they, though? If Sir Kay's adoptive sister was King Arthur, what did he see me as? No, at the end of the day, what did Ad see me as? Even thinking of that question made my throat tighten, and I felt an unbearable fear.
Thank you for your explanation, Sir Kay. Because of that, once the body, mind, and soul are united, King Arthur will be revived as the once and future king. At least the villagers think so.
Bazak continued.
That's strange. Even if the body and the mind are reunited, there is no way to replicate the soul. If they did manage to do so, it wouldn't just be greater magecraft, but true third magic.
Magic. My mentor had mentioned it before during classes at the clock tower. Though magecraft was a part of mystery, it was within the reach of humans. Because of the advance of technology, the range of it has also become wider. Now, people could dive deep into the ocean, communicate with people in distant places instantly, and even travel to different planets. However, there are still things that don't exist. 5 such things exist. The scholars of mystery call these 5 impossibilities magic.
Yes. It should be impossible to gather all 3. The church never believed that they could, and neither do most of the villagers.
Bazak agreed with my mentor on this. That was the inherent problem with recreating a soul. Though this place had succeeded in recreating the body and the mind, the last component was still out of reach. Next, Bersac turned to him dramatically.
The way to recreate a soul. Don't you know the answer to that question?
A couple of seconds of silence followed. How could I know? The silence seemed to say. However, there was a change a few seconds later.
Could it be servants?
Though I have never seen them myself. Servants in the Holy Grail War are summoned together with their souls from the throne of heroes, right? If that is the case, if the Fifth Holy Grail War begins, and King Arthur is summoned as a servant, the possibility that the three can be united will appear.
The Holy Grail War. The war that my mentor had taken part in before. The war which he had once wanted to partake in again. The war that was rumoured to be able to summon even the souls of heroes, which was an anomaly amongst mages. I had never thought that ritual in the Far East could be related to this place in that kind of way.
Of course, the chance for that is not high. The chance that King Arthur will be chosen from the millions of heroic spirits is slim, to say the least. However, the Church has noticed this possibility. Since they always send overseers over, they are more informed about the Holy Grail War than the Clock Tower is. For that reason, they sent people over from their headquarters early on and thoroughly investigated the village.
Sister Illumia, isn't it?
The nun that the church had sent here a couple of years ago, was she a member of the Holy Church? Bersac gave the answer to this question easily.
Exactly. Sister Illumia is the illegitimate child of one of the cardinals.
The unexpected words took my breath away. Cardinals? Aren't they high-ranking members of the service organization?
Unfortunately, that kind of identity can't be disclosed, so she was raised in an orphanage, though, as an executor, her abilities are quite outstanding. Usually, they wouldn't send someone like her to such a remote place. That means she must be interested in this village. According to some information, rumors say she volunteered to be here.
The cards on the table were flipped over one by one. My brain could not keep up with the speed at which things were being revealed. So much information was now swirling around in front of my eyes, to the point that I couldn't process it all. What would happen? What had happened? Before we arrived in this second cycle, had the events played out the same way?
Oh, yes. By the way, a messenger from the church was posing as one of the traveling merchants. He seems to have fallen into the hands of the villagers.
Bersac's even words made me feel as if I had just taken another blow to the head as I was still reeling from what he had said earlier. How? Worried just how many hidden conspiracies surged in this village. Of course, I didn't think that this was a regular village. Though it looked that way at a first glance, as one of its members, I thought I was aware how strange this village was, at least to some extent. However, this was completely outside my realm of imagination. The place where I had spent most of my life now seemed hopelessly distant. Unknowingly, I stopped walking and finally realized it. I turned around to see that my mentor had also stopped in his tracks.
Is that the case? Is that the case?
As he said that, my mentor bent over. He covered his face with his hands and muttered again.
Sir Kay, it's this, isn't it? It's all a trap.
My mentor nodded at the shrugging Silver Knight and then dramatically walked up to the gravekeeper and asked him a question.
Bersac Blackmore, who is that behind you? No.
Wait! Why would it turn out like that? Wasn't Mr. Bersac Grace's companion? No. What even is the mind of King Arthur? No! The crystal ball is too blurry. Do you think I'll be able to fix it if I hit it at a 30-degree angle with a strengthened karate chop?
A raucous voice resounded in the space. Many crystal balls floated in the air. At first, there had only been one, but they had kept dividing and increasing like bubbles until they surrounded them. The sound came from the blonde teenager.
Innocence and curiosity were spread thickly like butter all over his eyes, which showed the nervousness and truthfulness in his heart. He had been staring at the crystal ball with those eyes.
It was Flattiscardo's. Needless to say, he was the most notorious teenager in the El-Melloi classroom. Someone else was next to him.
What's going on?
He moaned. Small crackles of lightning radiated off of the other unmatched person of the El-Melloi classroom, Sven Glashite. The magical energy rippling around the teenager became hostile because of his anger. Though this was inevitable for users of bestial magecraft, it was rarely this full of hostility. Clearly, the teenager's emotions were already outside of his own control.
Is there still a point to watching? The hard work of the actors should be rewarded, so I added more crystal balls. Does that displease the two of you?
Said the young man in response to those howl-like words. Though he seemed to be a young man, his true age was indiscernible. In the blinking lights, that face, which looked to be that of someone aged around 25, appeared sometimes like that of an ancient sage. Was this a characteristic of superior dead apostles? The only thing that was for sure was his grace and unpredictability. He was the director of the Atlas Institute, Zepia Eltnam Atlasia, the man who stood in a position above all 12 lords of the clock tower. Two people confronted one person, or perhaps you could say,
As I said earlier, you two cannot interfere with the reenactment. Unfortunately, you are not qualified to do so. After all, you were not in the village back then. Though your acting abilities were quite admirable during the audition, you don't meet even the most basic requirements. It is already a compromise of mine to let you observe from the backstage.
Worried Zepia's incessant words and unique performance made it difficult to interpret the true meaning of his words. Though, he didn't seem to be lying.
Right now, Lord El-Melloi II and Grey were being struck by something in the crystal. The overwhelming changes in the world of the past, or perhaps you could say the relationships that they had uncovered, were now driving both of them to the brink.
Why wasn't he there with them? Why was he not there to tell him that whatever happened, Vin Glashite was always going to be their companion? His frustration nearly made his magical energy go out of control, and Sveen desperately controlled himself as he tried to organize his thoughts. Also, the Atlas Institute, the organization that Zepia belonged to, was sometimes referred to as a living hell. If someone stepped into its gates, they would never get to leave their comma. They would drown in their own research and dedicate their entire life to the eternal. They were like computers that ran forever in the middle of a cold computing room. It would be a stretch to call them living organisms at all. For that reason, it was easy to understand why the director of that institution spent so much time wandering outside it. Though the situation in the village was urgent, the utmost care had to be taken either way. First of all, what's going on here? He let his own eyes turn though there was only a couple meters of distance, it felt like the space stretched out indefinitely to Sveen. Just like how Sveen had unusual senses in terms of magecraft, his regular senses were also overwhelmingly sharp. Now those senses were telling him that this space did not follow the laws of physics. If he couldn't figure out the structure of the location, he had no chance of winning a fight against that man. Take your time, he thought, as he swallowed his own dissatisfaction. He only needed to experience a miserable defeat once. That time with the seal designated as Akituka was enough. She had forced him to see that in this world, not every opponent could be dealt with using bestial magecraft. If that was the case, he had to be more careful. He needed to use his goal as a basis to create the conditions for victory and to protect the things which he had to protect. First, he needed to understand the strange device more. Wait, weren't you in the village back then? So, does that mean you can also enter that world like my teacher and Miss Gray?
Your analysis is correct, but paradoxes must be avoided. If I entered the world while constantly calculating it, the system would have to recalculate the world, myself included. I would then basically automatically calculate results based on the recalculation. That would be a giant problem. Though some people prefer scripts that contain large amounts of information. There's no way that amount of information could be accommodated in this kind of nested structure. I am also looking forward to how Lord El-Melloi II and that Gravekeeper girl will continue to struggle to reach their goal.
Half of what he said could not be understood. In a nutshell, it meant that the one who had the most to do with the current situation, Zepia, could not control what happened in that world. It seemed that regardless of whether or not what he saw was a simulation or the actual past, they all had the ability to operate even without Zepia's ideas.
Unfortunately, I cannot, because that would go against the contract.
The contract?
In the past, the Atlas Institute signed a contract with the previous form of this village, though I wasn't the person who made the deal. Its power is absolute. I must abide by it, including in cases of anomalies such as yours.
The contract of Atlas. He remembered hearing about this somewhere. The 7 contracts that the Atlas Institute had sent out in the past. The Atlas Institute would have to accept and fully support any request made by those who held the contract, or something along those lines. Then, was that the reason why the director of the Inescapable Institute of Atlas was now wandering about?
He carefully pondered the information in his hands like he was examining a sparkling gem, or like he was sniffing some food. However basic a problem might be, he needed to start from the same place. The teenager knew this well. If he didn't want to fail miserably again, he needed to give himself as much of an advantage as possible. It didn't matter how embarrassing it would be, he needed to gather all the fragments of stars, possibilities. He could, even if it meant he had to kneel on the floor and beg.
He said that Flat, Sir Kay and him were anomalies. He carefully made sure that he did not overinterpret anything. That means that this person has no way of making sure of whether we would be here or the events that happened with his teacher, and Greytan he recalled what he had been told of before. It was said that Zepia spoke almost as if he could predict Lord El-Melloi and Reyna's futures. It was a distillation of Magecraft that was the direct opposite of that of the clock tower. The power to calculate countless yet not infinite futures, and to say that reality was just one of many scripts, a simple incarnation of calculation. Even still, Zepia called the current situation an anomaly. If that was the case, he put his hands behind his back and moved his fingers. He adjusted the magical energy to a wavelength that only Flat could see and used it to talk to him by making the energy take the form of text. It was something they did quite often when they teamed up. The message he sent read, "Analyze this Mage craft. Take care not to be noticed."
Flat gave a reply immediately. His signal was to rub his fingers together rhythmically. Svinna could clearly pick up the smell of the oils on his fingers rubbing together. Not even their teacher, Lord El-Melloi II, had noticed how they communicated with each other through magical energy and smells. Zepia showed no sign of noticing this either. Flat could probably go up against the alchemy of the Atlas Institute. The best proof of that was how he managed to break the bounded field in the forest to arrive here. As long as he was given enough time, he could probably fashion a way to take revenge on Zepia.
The problem lies in the timing. When would this alchemist from the Atlas Institute let down his guard? This alchemist had probably already seen through all their intentions. The only reason why he did not take any action now was not out of laziness or arrogance, but simply because he thought that Flat and Sveen were not sufficiently strong. In his brain, they had probably already lost the fight thousands of times. If that was the case, what he needed now was not just his own efforts, but also some other key factor. What might that be? He thought, as he pondered his own powerlessness, he felt as if he was a snail that only crawled the length of a finger while its opponent had already run all the way around the earth. Still, even though he knew there was such an insurmountable difference in their abilities, he had no choice but to continue. Would it happen when his teacher undid the puzzle? Would it be when the knight does something? Or perhaps would it be something even more surprising than that? Why did he always have to rely on others? He felt a pain in his heart, as if it was being pressed with a vice. Every expression and sentence from Gray that hid a trace of sadness seemed to cut at his insides. It was the first time that Sven realized that watching other people's movements could bring so much of a burden to his body. He hadn't even felt this much pain when his magic circuits had been awakened. Even so, he would wait, even if it was for eternity, the thought. Even if it was just to bring her even the tiniest bit of help.
Mathis chapter 2.
Speaking of which, what's that brother of mine doing now, I wonder?
Rhine suddenly mumbled to herself as she propped her chin up on one hand. She was sitting in an office that overlooked the entire campus of the Department of Modern Magecraft, Norwich, which was actually just a single street. There were mountains of documents piled atop the elegantly styled rosewood desk. Some of them included requests from instructors to purchase new catalysts, while others were from other departments who were asking to borrow the classrooms. Either way, they were all random, boring chores. Regardless of whether they were friends or enemies, everyone wanted to try and gain something for themselves while the Lord was absent. This pile of papers was, to some extent, the result of their careful efforts. However, it was actually easier for Rhinus to handle it herself than to have it go through the hands of her adoptive brother first, so this was a welcome opportunity for the young woman.
They even bothered to try and conceal their true intent. If it was my brother, he might have gotten tricked by it.
Rhine signed the paperwork and organized the documents efficiently as she began to think about her brother and his disciple again. Because that village had no phone signal coverage, she had no idea what they were up to now. Though Flat and Svin had gone along with them, there was now a way to determine whether they would be safe, especially given the current situation. Grey had always tried to avoid that village before. Perhaps they were there to face the incident in the past. Either way, it wasn't the first time those two had put themselves into danger, she concluded to herself as she yawned. She picked up the steaming cup of black tea beside her and took a sip. Then she grabbed a brightly coloured macaron and placed it in her mouth.
Tremo, is this really from the same place as usual? Why doesn't it taste as good as it used to? What is it, miss? My sincerest apologies, miss. According to the usual test for poison, the ingredients are exactly the same as they used to be. Oh, is that so? I am very sorry that you cannot enjoy the desserts alongside you. Are you saying that's why it tastes different? According to some movies, even if the flavor of something remains the same, the way people perceive its taste will change. Go and forget all the crap Flat taught you. I will see to it.
A maid replied with an innocent expression. Rains gave a light. Huh. Withered leaves swirled about outside the window. It was already halfway through the month of January. The Fifth Holy Grail War was about to begin. She had talked to some informants from the church privately and heard that some people had already started summoning servants. It was also said that the seal designator appointed by the clock tower was also nowhere to be found, which was unsurprising. Supposedly, as time went on, the Holy Grail would choose its own masters, so it wouldn't be long until all the remaining spots were filled. Even if her brother flew back from Grey's hometown, he wouldn't be able to make it.
How terrible. No, how delectable. It's so delectable that I don't even need to say that it is.
She picked up another macaron and ate it, smiling.
No matter what tricks my brother pulls, there's no way he can turn back time, is there? He's not a wizard, after all.
There was no way the young woman could have known that the words she uttered happened to coincide with the strange situation her brother was now dealing with. The air around me was heavy, as if it had solidified. Ever since we arrived at the summer in the second cycle, I felt as if my senses had become sharper. My bodily functions had been forced to operate under the extreme pressure. Even in this hopeless time, my body still had a superficial will to live. I felt a bit discontented with this, but at the same time I was also somewhat relieved. My mentor and Berserk stood in front of my eyes. Both of them had helped me in the past.
Didn't I already say that I wasn't your enemy?
Berserk's voice did not waver in the slightest. I recalled that he once said that if grave keepers lose their composure, the dead would not be able to rest. Though the times have changed since then, these words were still etched clearly in my mind. Berserk did not speak much, but every sentence he did say felt like it had a life of its own.
You are not an enemy, just as Sir Kay has confirmed. However, I'm not saying that you are simply an ally either. He probably wanted to confirm this as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so knowledgeable about the state of affairs of the Holy Church.
Don't go around remembering everything I say so clearly. You remind me of a certain gloomy auxiliary officer.
I suppose I'll take that as a compliment.
Of course it isn't a compliment, though you would be the right man for that job.
The knight let out a light snort and then looked toward Bazak.
All of that is to say that you have some sort of fancy connection to outside organizations, don't you? Possibly with the king of this country. No, it's called the government in this era, isn't it?
My eyes widened in response to these unexpected words.
The country I lived in back then was quite complicated. There were traitors of traitors, a court magician that was only there for the fun of it, philandering knights, and a goody-two-shoes king. It only gets more complicated with the involvement of Rome and other outer powers. Thanks to that, though, I've gotten sharper. Your intel doesn't sound like it comes from a person, and your comments feel incredibly incongruous. It sounds less like an evaluation of someone and more like a report of a giant group of people. Ah, for goodness sake, this stuff always comes just as I'm enjoying myself.
Silence descended in the tunnel. The damp, unpleasant air seemed to be dyed with the sound of silence. Bazak? Bazak? The old gravekeeper sighed when he heard me call his name.
I never thought that someone like you would be with them. Though Lord El-Melloi II has a good eye for noticing things, that means that he is good at political maneuvering. I thought that as long as that Rhaenys girl isn't here, I would be able to remain undetected.
Are you admitting to it?
Some of our distant relatives have contacts in the British government. Because of the disagreements between this village and the Holy Church, they sometimes provide me with convenient information. I do not act in accordance with the government. However, they do not give away information for free either. I suppose you could say that our goals are the same.
Can you answer me this time, then? What is your goal?
Bazak spoke up after a brief pause.
I want to delay the revival of King Arthur. Delay, but not prevent. I am not only the gravekeeper of Blackmoor Graveyard, but also a mage that was raised on this land. Therefore, as the overseer of this place, I must prioritize the peace of this land. If King Arthur awakens from her rest one day in the future, that would be something worth celebrating.
His serious voice reminded me of the past. As this man had once said, death should be respected, but not feared. The darkness of the abyss of the underworld shall one day swallow all that once lived and consign them to oblivion. For that reason, all new lives must be worth celebrating. This should be true no matter what evil being it might be. I didn't know why, but I really liked how he didn't directly say that it was the truth. The training for becoming a gravekeeper of Blackmoor Graveyard was difficult, and though I lost consciousness many times in the past, I never developed hatred for it. Perhaps this was why.
It's not the time for that yet, though. At least, I don't think so. Therefore, I want Grey to escape, because it will help achieve my own wish.
Bazak concluded. Then, tugging at his beard, he turned to face me.
Aren't you mad at me?
I'm actually more surprised than angry. I replied at a loss for words. It was no wonder. Too many secrets had already been revealed about the village for me to accept already. Even if someone told me now that the gravekeeper that had been taking care of me had ties with the government, I wouldn't know how to react. Though, I thought of something else. Mr. Bazak, you don't think that I should die, right?
Of course not.
The gravekeeper did not look at me when he said that. I wasn't sure why, but I got the feeling that this was a show of his sincerity. For that reason, I didn't thank him.
I see. Since you understand, take the side tunnel. There's a route there that the villagers don't even know. It shouldn't take that much effort to escape from there. No, though I understand your goal, I cannot accept your proposal, because we have already accepted it before.
There was no way he could comprehend that sentence. Even if we told him how we returned here, he would probably not be able to understand it.
Either way, please think of it as precognition for now. My apologies, but please don't take my personal abilities into account here. I just happened to get informed of the results.
Though it looked as if he had calmly accepted it, his voice still sounded stern. Perhaps the conversation touched on something he minded. It seemed that Bazak's source of information in the government also investigated my mentor's abilities. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. As if to break the silence, the knight spoke.
So what are you planning to do?
Huh? Me?
Yes, you!
The knight said coldly, though he never acted like he was taking things seriously. Not even when he was interrogating Bazak just then. I felt that he was now staring at me sincerely. His figure was so blurred it was impossible to see his facial expression, but his feelings were still conveyed to me. I didn't know why, but his question reminded me of something. It was almost like the box that was once my only friend. He was asking me a question. He had asked me what I planned on doing. The words got stuck in my throat. I knew that if I said them out loud, there was no going back. This was different from how it usually was. Usually, I would accompany my mentor to dangerous places of my own accord. This time it was the other way around. If I uttered what I wanted to say, my mentor would have to accompany me into danger. Considering his way of thinking, he would do nothing to stop me either. However, I still spoke. I would like to go meet the other me, Paz, the mind of King Arthur. I had probably always wanted to say this. I had been thinking about this ever since we met not long ago. I would like to know what goes on inside her head and what she thinks of me. Not what the mind of King Arthur believes in, but what she believes in. I think that she is the secret of the village and what I didn't bring myself to face before. That was why I had such a rough time in the first cycle. It was because I cowered instead of facing what I was supposed to face.
The first cycle?
Please don't mind.
My mentor cleared his throat as Bazak frowned, suspicious. The knight spoke up again.
It's not a bad idea, but you'll get killed if you don't pull it off. Just to be clear, I can't be relied upon. I'm not one of those idiots who probably even have brains made of muscle who can turn the tide of a battle just because of their strength. It's probably safer to just escape, like the Gravekeeper said.
I know, I think so as well. But, even so, I still want to meet her. She might not think that way. Didn't you two already meet each other? She left first, didn't she? Unless you're looking to get caught by those bone soldiers, and to get used by the villagers in that shady ritual, in which case, go ahead. I know. But I still want to meet her.
Pretty stubborn, aren't you? Well, what do you think of that, Berzak Blackmore?
There's nothing I can do about it.
The old gravekeeper sighed. He raised his wrinkled hand and pointed at me.
Gray, hold, add up to eye level.
But Ad's still asleep.
That doesn't matter. What's important now is not Ad's personality, but its functions as a mystic code. The magic crests implanted to you were especially altered to fit it, so all you have to do is let the scythe take over, as usual.
Sure. Cast by Artal Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. I raised the scythe as Bazak had instructed, just like what I used to do when I trained. I held the center of my body as close to the scythe as possible and focused my attention there, removing the boundary between the two and filling the space with emptiness. Focused. Focus. Making yourself as small as possible is the same as making yourself expand to the extreme. Compress yourself while using your consciousness to fill up the world. I tried my best to suppress a smile, because this was very similar to what my mentor had talked about once in class. Though I had attended classes at the clock tower for a while, most of it had not managed to stick. I felt as if I was an idiot who was staring at a giant block of gold, but was completely ignorant about its value. Even so, I still managed to learn something. It all seemed like an overly luxurious gift to me. I took a deep breath. I focused on the still sleeping Ad. With a thunk, I touched the handle of the scythe to my forehead. The ice-cold metal made my forehead slightly numb, and the tingling sensation soon spread throughout my whole body, seeping into my skin. A light shined in my mind. Suddenly, the light was linked together, and a milky way of light spread out above and below me. I see a path,
What a surprise.
I heard Bazak's voice.
I originally planned on convincing you to leave if it failed. I never thought that it would succeed on the first try. It's only been half a day, so what happened?
Bazak's half a day was half a year to me. That was the difference. Though, that was not all. What should I do next?
Tell the path of light where you want to go. I don't know what this place looks like in its entirety, and probably neither does the church or the mind of King Arthur. However, that thing is different. It is precisely because it is a lifeless, sealing mystic code that it has the right to know everything about the graveyard.
My mentor had once said that graveyards were tiny underworlds. Perhaps this was the same. This place was Blackmoor Graveyard, a sanctum that the living could not enter. When they created this sealing mystic code that was Ad, they had added the ability to resonate with this sacred place. The gravekeeper referred to Bazak and I, but also to this mystic code itself. As I realized this, I continued to focus my consciousness onto the light. There was a great amount of hidden meaning there beyond my grasp. It was up to me to refine it and to select the relevant information. I am fine, sir. Bazak frowned. Uh-oh, but the situation here was already too complicated for us to explain how we came from the future. Even if we did explain it to him, perhaps it would only make him more confused. Nothing, I know the way. Let's go. I forced my stiff legs to move and ran forwards. Perhaps it was because of the tuning, but I felt that my hearing had become sharper. Because of that, I heard what my mentor whispered.
Thank you, Sir Kay.
Huh. What the heck is that supposed to mean?
Because you helped me say what I was supposed to have said.
Understood. Don't think too much about it. I just thought that it would be better to find someone to make a decision than to waste time arguing about what we should do.
What my mentor said to Sir Kay made me feel somewhat sad. How much help had I received from others, I thought. A sense of shame and relief swirled in my heart. In order to ignore this sadness, I stepped forward into the unknown darkness of the underground. Sister Illumia trotted along in the underground tunnel. The roads beneath this village were complex and intricate. Though she didn't know all of the paths, she was utilizing one she did know to make her way to a path that Grey might take. As they walked, Father Fernando, who was carrying a lantern and breathing heavily, spoke up.
Ha! Ha! So Grey did end up going with that mage to the tunnels, huh?
Illumia winked as if she was making a face.
Just can't understand. Wasn't she pretty compliant? They didn't tell her the details, but even if she knew, isn't that girl the sort of person who would willingly hand her life over? No, perhaps I should say that. Didn't they raise her to be that kind of person?
Maybe something happened to make her change her mind.
As she said that, Illumia slowed down slightly. Father Fernando tilted his chubby head with a suspicious expression.
Such as that Lord of the Clock Tower?
Fio de Mage, Sal, Novo, Do, Dupes.
Illumia's face twisted in spite.
Smoodo at least managed to get the El-Melloi princess to leave. At least I didn't urge her to leave in vain.
Sometimes even I don't know what to make of your strange preferences.
Arrogant all the people there are heretics, so doesn't it make it all the more important if they look pretty or not? Either way, those who do not follow the teachings of the Lord are not worthy of my trust.
Illumia proclaimed arrogantly, but with a look of indifference. The priest frowned as he wiped his head.
You are that kind of person.
Dismisse-me, E tinturou-vere syntepetectores dos erretes, pejnunido considere dematol.
Weary, is that so? Small-town priests like me don't really understand what you higher-ups think.
Ausmug, does that include illegitimate children?
The nun smiled, satisfied as the priest tried to catch up with her while he dabbed at his face with a handkerchief. The incongruity between the voluptuous lady and the almost spherical priest made it feel like a scene out of an old horror movie. Soon the tunnel widened. A silhouette appeared in the inky darkness that was enough to hide a mansion.
Durante, faundo,
However, as she got a better look at the figure, Illumia blinked several times in quick succession. Though she had felt an aura similar to that of Gray's a moment ago, the one who stood there was a completely different person. The figure, clad in a strange mask and some armor, turned slowly face to her. Many bone soldiers stood behind her. Even in this strange underground terrain, they extruded a shockingly powerful aura.
Em louco we've got here.
Nervousness and a will to fight arose in Illumia's tea-colored eyes.
Durante a ausência do morador. But this is the first time we've met, isn't it?
The masked person did not speak. However, she stared straight at the nun and the priest.
O challenging I've heard a lot about you, mind of King Arthur. I've heard that you are the master of the shadows of Blackmoor Graveyard. Do you not even want to bother greeting an executor of the Holy Church?
Observant, the nun seemed to know the true identity of the masked girl. The masked person was silent for a few moments before she raised one hand.
Commanding, deal with them.
Her sharp thoughts gave a command. At that, the bone soldiers protecting the masked girl charged. 2 precise lances were thrown at her, but they were deflected by the armor that covered Sister Illumia's arms at just the right time and angle. She rushed at her opponent and began launching an attack with fierce punches. One of the bone soldiers got pierced through immediately, while another had its mandible shattered by the impact of another punch.
I siete sensible, aren't you? I like that.
And tense the nun's ash lock crackled with purple electricity. The mystic code that could strike through all manner of mystic beings made Illumia's ferocious smile stand out even more. In the instant when she struck down a heretic, she felt the meaning of her life get fulfilled.
Does threatening killing Grey is one option, but it's not like I can deal with you instead, since this village wants to do some dumb thing wants to revive King Arthur. If one of you two isn't there, they would stop, wouldn't they?
As she said that, she licked her ruby-red lips and prepared to topple the remaining bone soldiers. However, at that moment, she stopped. Illumia halted to a sharp stop, turned around, and backhanded the humerus of a bone soldier that had snuck behind her as her eyes widened.
What is that?
Her exclamation fell to the floor of the underground cave. The body parts of the bone soldiers that Illumia had just pulverized had regenerated, and the bone soldiers stood up once more to slash at her. Even the bone that she had just backhanded was now visibly regrowing. It was almost like viewing a video in reverse. Illumia used an uppercut to shatter the mandible of one of her opponents again, before distancing herself from them to prevent herself from being surrounded.
How is this happening? The man underground is this thing. So why do these small fries have so much Bajika energy? Do I have to hit the vitals for these things to die?
Panicked. Sister Illumia, this is because of the above ground.
So, it was because of the support from the villagers. She had thought of this possibility before. At this moment, there were large amounts of villagers praying to the Black Madonna statue above the surface. This kind of act was equivalent to offering up their own magical energy, and the villagers here had more odd than normal people of the modern era. For that reason, the bone soldiers underground could regenerate indefinitely. The dead could remain on this earth because they were accepting the prayers and intent of the living, leaving their tracks and slashing their blades. Sister Illumia dodged the attack in the nick of time again.
Story there's no end to this.
Yes, there is.
Ominous, the masked girl who had only been observing before began to take action. Illumia felt her knees go weak. It was as if all the energy in her had suddenly disappeared. The girl was taking all of the ode from the nun to create something. The spirit-like entity that appeared devoured the ode of the villagers and the thin manor in its surroundings, creating a storm that was not meant to have existed below the ground. The manor had felt suspiciously thin for a while. Was it because...
Strange is there. Something there.
groaned Illumia as she manipulated the magical energy inside her body. There was no way to tell whether her speculation was true, because, in the masked girl's hands, there was... It was like I was being guided by a shining star. The light that had once appeared in my mind seemed to be pulling my legs forward, leading me down a path. When we reached a crossroads, my body would move on its own, and I wouldn't get lost in the dark. I walked as if I was sleepwalking in front of my mentor, the knight, and the gravekeeper. The journey was surprisingly long, enough to make me realize the true scale of these underground tunnels. Mysterious after a while, we arrived at a large, open cavern. There was a structure there. My mentor raised the magecraft light and illuminated it.
There's a temple underground? Or it could be a grave.
Was this the secret of the village? A corner of the knowledge of the gravekeepers that had not yet been given to me?
Questioning, is it Berserk Blackmore? Do you know anything about this?
No. I've only heard that there was a structure underground, but I've never seen it before.
Without further questioning, my mentor stepped into the temple. As soon as we entered, a silhouette appeared in front of us. But it wasn't a person. A humanoid statue stood there. Seeing the same figure that I had seen countless times before made me gasp. There's a Black Madonna statue here as well. The black-dyed statue of the Holy Mother had been placed in a corner of the temple. My instincts told me that it was as old as the temple itself, perhaps even older. The one above ground might even be a replica of this one.
Analytical, I had a hypothesis about this statue when we visited the village last time. Black Madonnas appear all over Europe in a multitude of forms. Most of them are created by fusing with the patron goddess of the land.
The patron goddess of the land, you said?
Lecturing, most of the patron saints are like this as well. Most religions are somewhat adaptable. When a religion is spread to a new region, not only are its teachings spread, it also maintains a bit of a surplus to assimilate local legends and myths. The Black Madonna is an example of this.
My mentor's voice resounded in the temple as it would in his lectures, as if he was praising the statue, but also as if he was criticizing it.
Analytical, there is a certain enchantress considered to be a derivative of a mother goddess. She was mentioned across multiple eras in various different legends, and is probably a result of the fusion of several existing figures. Sir Kay Morgan Le Fay is a familiar name to you from the Arthurian legends in which you appear in. Yes?
A bothersome teacher you are.
Though, rather than being actually bothered, I felt that he just wanted to mock him. Morgan Le Fay. I recalled that she was the older sister of King Arthur in Arthurian legends. That meant that this person also had complicated relations with the adoptive older brother of King Arthur.
Lecturing in Celtic mythology, a goddess known as Morrigan appears frequently. Sometimes she is the queen of the dead, sometimes she is the goddess of war, and sometimes she appears as the three goddesses of fate. However, she is associated with crows and frequently transforms into them.
Crows, nevermore, and the grave keepers of Blackmore, who led flocks of ravens.
Understood. Aye. Unfortunately, I don't know much about Morgan. She was a complicated woman. No. Actually, most women are pretty complicated.
The knight answered, as if he was telling a story of his past. How long ago did these events happen from his perspective? Was it days ago, or was it more than 1,000 years ago like what we saw? Or perhaps, was it a completely different feeling?
Though, this village is probably related to Morgan. I can see some hints of her from the statue. Is that why they chose this village? It's very unlikely that she wanted to save her. That person hated the king, and I think she plotted some sort of scheme with Mordred. There wasn't a need to hold a grudge after her death, but I was already dead then, so I don't know much about it.
I knew how the legend of King Arthur ended. It was the Battle of Camlan. King Arthur defeated the traitorous Knight Mordred, but was fatally wounded as a result, and gave the holy sword to the trustworthy knight Bedivere. It is the most famous legend in all of Britain, and there are multiple versions of the story. In one of them, 3 fairies appeared, and one of them was said to be Morgan. My mentor shook his head gently.
Analytical, I don't know what Morgan was thinking then. Since you don't know, I have no way of knowing either. However, regardless of what she thought, she left behind a spark. The spark was passed down from generation to generation, and after a millennium, something was formed.
The topic of conversation had inevitably returned to me. This time, though, I didn't feel incredibly surprised. My mentor turned to look at the old gravekeeper.
We're questioning Berserk Blackmore. What do you think?
The only thing I heard from my predecessor was the situation regarding the rules of the village. Those rules have always been taught to the gravekeepers of Blackmore Graveyard, including the one about the Black Madonna.
Can confirming you're referring to those 4 rules.
The 4 rules of the village. First, one must pray to the Black Madonna statue upon arrival. Second, one must not go out late at night. Third, one must not go near the graveyard alone. Fourth, a group of many may enter the graveyard, but they must not enter the swamp. Of course, I remembered the rules that I must follow. My mentor confirmed it out of caution, and Bazak nodded seriously in response.
Indeed. When someone breaks these rules, I will be notified through the magic crests passed down through the gravekeepers. This part has not been transplanted to Grey yet.
Ah. I covered my right hand, though they were both called magic crests, and supposedly worked in the same way. The magic crests of the gravekeepers of Blackmore Graveyard were very different from that of mages. No new magecraft was added to it with each generation, but there would be virtually no rejection, even if it was transplanted to someone like me, who was not related by blood. In terms of function, it was basically just used to manipulate Ad, though I only just got told that it could be used to surveil the village. I didn't find it to be anything worth being surprised about. Sir?
Muttering, there are 4 rules. First, you have to pray to the Black Madonna statue. If that's the case...
Then he used his finger to draw a circle in the air. I had a vague feeling that that was the hope of the village. The slight indent was in the same place as the one in the map of the village. I felt a little surprised that I still remembered such a thing.
Analytical, the one about not entering alone basically just means that you have to go along with a gravekeeper, right?
Well, you could put it like that, yes.
Muttering, whom would this affect in this situation?
My mentor bent over and fell into a silence. When my mentor was thinking like this, he hardly reacted to anything. It was as if he locked himself up in a fortress in his mind, pouring all of his intellect and ability into solving a complicated mystery. Although he was not as competent compared to others in terms of magecraft, he was by no means inferior to them in terms of knowledge and thinking ability. Perhaps that would be mocked by others as futile efforts. They were my mentor's specialty. Therefore, I didn't disturb him. Basak and the knight did not say a word either.
Grey.
Oh.
You plan on meeting the mind of King Arthur, yes? If that's the case, could you please help me do something?
Hearing what he had to say next, I could not help but blink several times in quick succession. Sure, but is it really okay to leave it to me?
Confident, you are the most suitable person for the job. Compared to me, it would definitely be more effective if you said it. Though it is a risky bet, it's our only option if we want to make any progress.
Worried, I swallowed when I heard my mentor say the word risky. My mentor was frequently involved in dangerous situations, so his ability to notice risk had improved accordingly. How dangerous would the task I was to do have to be in order for my mentor to make such a judgment? I understand. I still nodded. No matter what happened, I should not refuse my mentor's request. Even though I didn't know how dangerous it was or why he asked me to do this, there wasn't much to object to. The only thing that I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for would be a failure to help my mentor. Though, if I said that to him, it would probably just make things difficult for him. Just as I silently made my choice, a light suddenly flashed through the temple. No, was that really a flash of light? Though it shined, it only existed within our minds. However, we knew that ray of light. Urgent, led by our shock, we rushed out of the temple in a panic. The sight that appeared in front of our eyes was difficult to believe. Two powers clashed near the temple. One side, needless to say, was the masked girl and the bone soldiers. The heavily armoured girl looked like a general dominating an ancient battlefield. With the chilling metal mask she wore, she looked like a witch that watched over the entire world from the sky. However, the problem lay in the lance in her hands. It was swathed in dark magical energy, and many thorns extended from it, like the fangs of a wolf. Though the appearance was incredibly different, I had to admit that it was similar to the lance that I was in possession of. That is to say, it was a dark Romleminiad. My voice trembled. Oh, never thought that I would see something like this. Oh, in a sense, this was an inevitable development. Since I was the body of King Arthur, and she was the mind, it would only make sense if we were both given similar lances. I heard my mentor swallow.
How did this happen?
Trembling, I heard that my lance is only a shadow of the original. Though my answer was not an explanation, my mentor appeared to have understood what I meant by it.
Since it's a shadow, it wouldn't be a problem for many of them to exist at once. What a bother.
As he said that, my mentor surveyed the area. Since she took out the lance, she must be facing off against someone. The enemy of the masked girl was also someone we knew. It was the Holy Church, specifically the nun that had arrived here several years ago, the person who I just got told was the illegitimate daughter of a cardinal. Sister Illumia.
Smooth. Oh, it's you. I thought you'd run off a long time ago, and now you're here, delivering yourself of your own accord.
Her luscious lips curled upward as the nun smiled. Strange, ancient-looking armor covered her limbs. With a wave of her hand, she gracefully backhanded the skull of a bone soldier. However, the bone soldiers didn't stay down for long. The bone soldiers rose up one after the other from the area that the nun had just cleared. It felt as if the more bone soldiers were struck down, the more would rise. Illumia looked somewhat annoyed, perhaps because the situation had been like this for a while. She used her palm to wipe the sweat at her neck and sighed exaggeratedly.
Ah, home. So the magical energy does come from the villages up there.
The villagers?
Even though there isn't much mana here, as long as there is a path, the villagers will continue sending their odd over. Ah, that's why those heretics are sinful. They imitated the Lord to do something completely different.
Intense Illumia pouted and began to move. Her attack was so outstanding it deserved to be recorded on instruction manuals for boxing. The arms of the bone soldiers shattered, and their legs went flying. However, they did not back down. And it wasn't just that. Every one of their body parts recovered within seconds of their destruction, and they surged forward to surround Illumia.
Gah!
Intense, she stormed forward with the speed of a gust of wind and ducked to dodge a strike from the bone soldiers beside her as she turned her head. The almost spherical priest ducked behind her and took a deep breath. He held on to the crucifix tightly and began to shout.
Hear this, all ye people. Give ear, all ye inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. None of them can by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him, for the redemption of their soul is precious, and it ceaseth forever.
Powerful, a spell was called forth with his voice. It was a surge of mystery. Inseparable from this land, the clock tower called it the greatest magecraft base of mankind.
Chanting their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, man, though he be in honor, abideth not. He is like the beasts that perish.
Powerful. A transformation happened as he spoke his sacred words. The bone soldiers who had been preparing to attack around the priest suddenly stopped. Not only that, some of them fell to the ground and immediately turned to dust. The priest carved a cross in the air and ended his prayer. As he did so, all the bone soldiers around him collapsed, as if they were groveling at the glorious light of God.
Impressed a baptism rite?
Analytical, it was the only type of magecraft that the Holy Church allowed. My mentor had said that once during a lesson. Though it was the only one, perhaps that was why it was all powerful. It's a process of using the greatest magecraft base of mankind with the basis of the faith of the Holy Church to forcibly purify the surroundings. Though the physical damage is rather low, it becomes incredibly effective when dealing with spirits or curses. That is how the faith, which they force onto everything, acts as a key to the divine principles. I see. Perhaps it could be called all-powerful. Though there were not many ways of doing it, it wasn't a problem, because everything could be suppressed by the immense power of a single force. Though my mentor had said that the Holy Church did utilize other types of mystery, such as what they called sacraments, and though Illumia's unnatural physical capabilities were also a sign of that, I was still shocked by it.
Analytical, it looks as if it's not enough to influence the spiritual cores of the masked one over there or the knight, but those 9 soldiers probably won't try to approach them again. We might even also experience some problems.
Just then I had been told that Sister Illumia was a formidable opponent. She was an executor sent by the Holy Church, who was a threat to the revival of the heretical king. However, I never thought that the priest who had always watched over the church would also be a mage.
I thought so. Just this trick alone won't be enough to deal with a lot of them.
As she looked towards the fresh wave of bone soldiers that were flooding in, she nodded in my direction.
I don't need it to deal with the mind of King Arthur, do I? Doesn't it achieve the same purpose if I kill you?
Intense, a beast-like smile appeared on Illumia's face, and she clapped her armoured hands together. Just as I thought I saw her gleaming teeth, she leaped up. Kicking the cave walls to propel herself, she nimbly flew across the walls. Her speed was unbeatable by a beast, much less a human.
What even is she?
I had seen this once, on the Rail Zeppelin, the prided secret fighting force of the Holy Church that they called the Xers. Their power, like sharpened blades of God, was definitely comparable to that of the mages of the clock tower. Since Ad was still asleep, even normal strengthening was difficult for me. I could not catch her agile movements. Illumia ran along a complicated path in the darkness, turning herself into a sharpened arrow, and launched herself towards me. My body automatically began to move. At least I needed to protect my mentor. But fortunately, my mentor's reflexes were not good enough for him to react to this, and the target of this attack was not my mentor, but me.
What a shame you were born in this village.
Along with her whispered words, the last thing I saw was her gauntlets, which sparked with purple arcs of electricity. However, there was the sound of 2 hard things clanging against each other.
I doubted what I had heard. It was the sound of Illumia's gauntlets being blocked by Bersak's axe.
He thought you would only stand by and watch.
I am also a gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard. The girl I chose to be my successor said she had something to do. Then it's my job to witness it until the end.
Durante a ausência do morador.
Illumia smiled. As she did, her legs transformed into shadows. Her ankles moved at an inhuman speed towards Bersak's head, missing it by a hair's breadth. With that sort of speed and intensity, it wouldn't be a surprise if the old man's face would split apart, as if it was sliced by a knife with that kick. Even so, Bersak did not waver.
Yes.
I began to run as if his voice had pushed me forwards. In the diluted magical energy of the cave, I barely managed to strengthen myself to the lowest degree so I could swing my scythe and drive away the bone soldiers. It felt like I was running in water, but I still desperately willed my legs to run and held the scythe tight. I arrived in front of the masked girl.
Questioning. Why do you persist?
Her thoughts resounded. Though it was the same thought as before, it felt different to me. Back then, I had felt only fear. I had been completely ignorant about how this underground cavern was beneath my village, and how someone just like me existed.
Questioning. For what purpose?
Stuttering, I have something to ask you. Struggling as I said this, the bone soldiers did not stop. Because I didn't have even a tenth of my regular power, I could not wield my scythe the way I used to. I could not cut the bone soldiers apart. Instead, I could only stop them from getting closer by knocking them away. Just keeping them occupied alone already took all of my strength. What a mess I was. Even so, I still asked my question. Are you really the mind of King Arthur?
Yes, I am indeed the will of the king of the past. I am a husk, a remnant. I exist only to preserve this information.
The information was transmitted through her thoughts. This alone frightened me. Just as she had said, those thoughts contained her will itself. However, it felt too orderly. It didn't make any sense. It was as if I was being shown an array of formulas and numbers. If she was in fact the mind of King Arthur, what was King Arthur like when she lived? Even though she only saved a barren corner of Britain once, she was praised by countless knights as a hero. She was loved by her people, celebrated by bards and poets. Even after 1,000 years, she was still the most prominent hero of this nation. However, if her mind was the girl in front of me, could a person really be like this? It seemed less like a human and more like something else. Like a divine spirit. No, I did not come here to think about this. Therefore, I looked up to ask the question I was here to ask. Her thoughts were blank. It was an emotion akin to surprise, as if she had asked me why I had asked this question. Of all questions. I thought at first that it was the sound of the cave breaking apart. However, the masked girl, who had always transmitted her thoughts to me, used her actual voice to speak.
10 years ago, I awakened in this place, along with you.
Along with me. Shocked, I was momentarily speechless. Of course, I remembered what happened 10 years ago, when my body had started to change, and when I began to become someone else. Back then, I had not been able to accept my own transformation, and had tried to hide away as much as possible. I never thought that she had awakened here then. If that was the case, that meant that she had lived here, underground, for 10 years. Then, what did the other villagers make of this?
Only the old woman whom they call their leader knows this. You call her Granny, yes? The church also has its suspicions.
A battle had been waging silently in this village. The truth, which had been hidden from me for 10 years, had finally been uncovered by someone who you could call another me.
Actually, I think it would be better for you to run, to escape to the ends of the earth. However, you came back. Unbelievably, you came back. Since you are here, there is only one thing I can do. Let me detain you right here.
The girl slowly raised her hand. A chill ran down my spine. Just as I saw the dark Rongomenead flash before my eyes, I lifted my scythe. Pained the immense force of the impact sent me flying. There was no way I could put up a fight against her. I flung through the air at an unusual angle, until my back hit the ground violently. A large amount of magical energy was now coursing through my body, and I felt as if all my nerves had just been severed. It felt like something was burning my blood and flesh. I clenched my teeth. Though I managed to stand up with the support of my scythe, I knew that my legs were still shaking. Not only that, a cracking sound emitted from the scythe, as if it was breaking apart from the strength of the attack. I'm not going to be able to hold out for much longer. Perhaps because she wanted to keep me alive. She had already shown mercy in her attack. However, for the scythe form of Ad, this was the limit. Ad was still asleep, and he couldn't even change forms, much less activate Rongomenead. Due to absorbing the magical energy from the dark lance, I barely managed to strengthen my limbs, but it was only to the degree of a normal person. I swallowed my fear along with the saliva in my mouth. I raised my head and tried to look the mask in the eye. However, the masked girl did not attack again immediately. Instead, she stood there silently.
Oi, you there! That's about enough.
And you are?
The knight that now stood in front of me had a strange expression on his face. No, his face was still blurry. So, I was probably the only person who thought that that was the case.
You really don't remember. I can't really blame you. Simply the mind alone is not enough to keep all the memories. Even if the memories are stored, they'll be hard to access. After all, that's the purpose of the body. What else would the brain be for? I'm also a mental model, and I can only retain my memories because of that tiny box.
The knight raised his index finger of the hand that was holding the sword and waved it around in the air. He seemed more like a clown than a knight. He was still a knight, though. Every jocular movement he made me think of a royal court, for some reason. Raucous, rigid, and somewhat nebulous, but also beautiful. The court of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
I can't just let you be. I'm not an empathetic guy, and I already feel uncomfortable just talking to you.
Shut it.
Intense along with the low voice, Rongomianiad sliced through the air thrice. The knight did not meet the attack head-on.
He nimbly dodged not only the spear itself, but also the magical energy encircling it, once, twice, and thrice. Though it was difficult to effectively perform a counterattack because of the distance between them, the knight didn't seem to have any intention of seriously fighting back.
He only used his sword to parry every once in a while, lazily dealing with the attacks. At first it had looked like the masked girl was clearly superior. However, she still did not manage to get close to Kay. Hell, it was the skill that I had seen before when he was fighting the bone soldiers. However, it was not beyond human capabilities. His abilities were not due to some sort of inborn talent, rather, what he had learned from years of experience on the battlefield. The knight backed away a couple of steps and knocked on his sword lightly.
If your fighting gets too pretty, it really is disgusting. Though, I'm not bad at the whole stabbing business either, so let me trouble you for a bit longer.
The voice emanating from beneath the mask was not hurried or annoyed. Even so, she did not move her eyes from the knight, as if there was some sort of invisible force between them. The knight continued to dodge the continuous attacks, avoiding the masked girl's dark lance, as if he was walking on a tightrope. He looked less like he was in a fight, and more like he was performing acrobatics. I also prepared to advance. Even if I could only take one step, I wanted to walk forwards.
Have concerned. Gray.
Someone called out to me. His thin arm was supporting me.
Sir. In this three-sided battle, my mentor was definitely the weakest. Even Father Fernando had the power to deal with the bone soldiers. The difference was too obvious. As always, my mentor did not have the ability to contribute anything in a fight. However, he was not completely powerless.
Aren't you here to meet her?
Yes. Wondering, why were his words able to bring me strength, I wonder? I took a deep breath, and air flowed into my clogged-up throat. Even if it was the foul air of the underground, I felt that I could continue to fight. Shouting my name is Gray.
I do not have a name. I am the mind of the king, just as you are the body.
The masked girl's voice did not show a trace of breathlessness, even though she never stopped waving her spear. It was almost as if this was to show that fighting was normal to her, as if to show that the king she was the mental model of had easily won thousands of battles. Not even the knight who had fought and died along with the king on the battlefield could make her shed a single drop of sweat. Though he dodged the masked girl's spear, as if he was cheating in a game, she did not tire, while Sir Kay did.
Your name does not matter. You and I will eventually become one.
I thought so. I had already expected this to be her answer.
If you find it inconvenient, you can call me the Husk King. I am only a third, and I cannot be referred to in parallel to the king. However, I am undoubtedly their king,
said the masked girl, looking to the bone soldiers in the surrounding area. No, not the masked girl, but the king of the dead, the Husk King. All right, Husk King. I am here because I have something to ask you. Since you were also here when I was in the village, I need to ask this question. I inhaled deeply. Then, with all my strength, I asked, Do you really, of your own will, wish for the revival of King Arthur? Intense on the other side, sparks flew between Bazak and Sister Illumia, the gravekeeper and the nun. Two people who had assisted each other once, in the village above the surface, not only when someone died and they had to hold services. Because the village was small, the two people spoke to each other quite often. Most of the physical work was entrusted to Bazak, and Illumia would sometimes use the firewood that Bazak had collected for warmth. In return, she would occasionally send him baked goods. The two people had probably expected that they would end up in this situation sooner or later, living out their lives peacefully while thinking of the slaughter that would take place one day. Illumia found an opening, stepped to one side, and spoke.
What a surprise. I thought that you only chose that girl for her talent. I never thought that you'd help out a friendship at a time like this.
Gravekeepers have their own ways.
Part of his shirt had already been scorched as a result of their fight. It was the damage done to the gravekeeper by the purple electricity emanating from the nun's ash lock.
Matria Mo Chin. And you also have connections to the government of this country? Oh, I mean Britain, not Wales.
So, you know?
Arrogant, of course. What do you think the Holy Church is?
Intense even as she spoke in a ridiculing tone, her movements did not stop. She approached again like a flash of lightning and threw a large number of fast punches aimed at Bazak's gut. Next, she turned and sent a high kick at the side of his head. This series of moves all carried the purple lightning from the conceptual weapon, and the bone soldiers in the vicinity were also pulverized. Evidently Bazak, who was able to counter all of her attacks, was no ordinary person either. He held the giant axe from the middle of the handle and swung precisely at the nun's vitals. He carefully observed even tiny changes in her movements, never giving Illumia the chance to gain the high ground. In terms of the amount of individual movements he made, he didn't even reach half of Illumia's number. But his efficiency made up for this difference. For that reason, the two were caught in a stalemate. No, that was not the case. Inevitably, the fight advanced to the next stage.
Cough the raven. Cough the raven.
Powerful, along with those words which had some sort of power imbued into them. Something appeared above the axe head. It was a raven. Illumia could tell that it had no physical form. It was a low-level spirit, probably summoned using the evocation techniques of the clock tower, although, since it was summoned by a gravekeeper of Blackmoor Graveyard here, what meaning did it hold? Intense, the raven cawed. Though the sound was indiscernible by the human ear, the explosive amount of magical energy knocked all the bone soldiers to the ground.
Thing.
Illumia had already escaped. The purple electricity that burst out from the ash lock cleaved through the darkness of the cave, and the shockwave released by the raven was cancelled out by the shield of purple light. This was probably her trump card. Even so, a large crack had formed on the ash lock on the nun's hands. That was the power of the raven's cry.
Is that how you see it?
The spirit raven landed on his shoulder and prepared for what was to happen next. The gravekeeper still had not looked towards the girl who was his heir, not for a moment.
Desperate, alas.
So was a limit to how many bone soldiers could be vanquished with a single baptism rite. Though the priest's incantation was impressive, it did not even reach the strength of a spell with a single count. That entire system of calculating power only mattered to that vile Mage's association, the priest thought. However, for that reason, he was running frantically around the place. He kept stumbling and tripping, and the edge of a blade would come at him every once in a while. He could only desperately continue to move his almost spherical body. Illumia was still focused on fighting that gravekeeper, and it would take a miracle for the priest to survive. After so many baptism rites he had lost count, he stopped for the first time. In the process of trying to escape, the priest had unknowingly arrived at the walls of the underground cavern. Fortunately for him, the bone soldiers chasing him had all begun to retreat, and the priest turned his head to see what they were running from. A strange sound was coming from the wall.
What?
Do you really wish for the revival of King Arthur of your own will? I felt as if I had finally spat something that had been bothering me out. She did not hesitate in the slightest when she answered.
Certain, of course. That is the reason why I have appeared. I am simply the result of data from the mind of King Arthur.
Had she been created the same way as Sakei to be a mental model, I felt as if something ice-cold had been stabbed into my chest. We had both been created, and she had awoken when I first began to transform. For that reason, I felt as if her words were my thoughts in the past.
You seem to believe that your own will is important. Do not force your values onto me.
W. Frim. Not a single opening, huh? Shouldn't you listen to the opinions of your companions? Since you're the mind of the king? Isn't that part of your job?
Illogical, that only applies if I have determined that collecting information and comforting the people is worth the time I will waste.
Understood, you really aren't the same at all, Husk King. At least you're not completely beyond salvation. As long as you put money, power, influence, and so on in your list of priorities and fight with other people about your interests, you can still act like a person. That auxiliary officer was always mumbling about numbers like that, and more people ended up using that technique. Ah, that's how it should be. The ideal king, you say? I can't bring myself to laugh at a joke so ridiculous.
Nonsense.
And tense the Husk King's lance slashed through the air. This time it sliced across the knight's arm. There was no blood. His spiritual core was not stable enough to materialize flesh or blood. However, he suffered as much harm as any human would.
Urgent. Don't Grey.
My mentor's voice stopped me as I was about to charge forward. Even now, the bone soldiers were still preparing to attack. Though most of them had been lured away by Father Fernando earlier, the rest were still enough to overwhelm us. My mentor fired a few weak magic bullets at them, but they were not enough to even stop them from advancing. For that reason, I made up my mind. Just before we arrived here, my mentor had asked me to do something. Though it could be dangerous, since she wouldn't listen to what my mentor had to say, I would have to pass the message along. That was what I had to do now. Even though I had been told that it might be dangerous. Shouting, "Please, hear me out," though you might not be able to understand it, but I've already seen the outside world. I've experienced it myself for many months. Emotional, I pressed a hand to my chest. In these months, I received so many gifts, to the point that I felt that they would overflow from my heart. Sincere, I always thought that I wouldn't be able to get used to it, even though I loved all sorts of stories. I always thought that I wouldn't be able to get along with those things. I thought that everyone would hate me as soon as I talked to them. But actually, that wasn't the case.
What do you mean by this?
As I had expected, the Husk King's voice carried some confusion. She probably didn't understand what I was talking about. Actually, if someone suddenly started telling me about this in the middle of a fight, I would probably feel disoriented too. Even so, I had to continue. I gathered up my bravery, and slowly said what my mentor had asked me to say. Tomorrow morning, the villagers will discover a corpse that looks exactly like me.
A corpse?
Yes. I don't know if that will happen this time, but it did happen before. These words had an unexpected impact.
Panicked. What? No. No. You're saying? You've already been in the outside world for months.
The masked girl, who had been fighting flawlessly before this, suddenly froze. Her lance faltered for the first time as she waved it about, and the desperate knight took this chance to escape. Was this what my mentor had intended to achieve? The Husk King held her lance in one hand and covered her mask with the other. At that moment, the mask made her look almost like a wild beast.
Agonized. Zepia, isn't it?
Was she related to that alchemist of the Atlas Institute? Perhaps because she was deep in thought, all the bone soldiers around her stopped moving. She continued to cry out, as if she wanted to crush all the darkness in the cavern.
That means... This is a reenactment.
I knew that was the sound of my mentor holding his breath. Her reaction immediately spread to the surroundings. Not because they had realized what the masked girl meant by her words, but because of the anger that now emanated from her. The emotion was so strong that even Bazak and Illumia turned to look at her.
Is that so? How ridiculous. How humiliating. That makes the two of us less than clowns, and simply puppets. No matter how many times we act out this same script, none of this matters. If that's the case, there's no point in this farce anymore.
Ominous as she said that, she raised the lance in her hands. Terrifying amounts of magical energy began to swirl with the lance at its center, forming a whirlpool of dark power many times the size of the lance itself.
Holy Lance, removing restraints.
Those 4 simple words made me feel an indescribable amount of fear. The large amount of magical energy completely froze me in place. It wasn't something that I could withstand, and it wasn't just me. Nobody here would be able to put up a fight against it, even though Bazak and Illumia both had outstanding fighting prowess, and Father Fernando and Sakei could possibly have trump cards that I had no knowledge of. They were all useless in the face of that lance, because that was a noble phantasm, the reason why heroic spirits were heroic spirits, the extraordinary legends that were recorded onto the history of mankind. And in that special place that shined at the end of the world, I knew so clearly that I was the person most likely to be able to contend with that end. I held my scythe tightly. However, as I expected, no reaction came from the box that rested inside it. Only a faint amount of magical energy came in response.
Worried it completely backfired.
He had said that it was a risky bet, and this was the result. A vision of a spinning roulette wheel appeared in front of my eyes. Our chips were our lives, and the skull-headed dealer laughed as he swept them all into his own arms. Was he the Grim Reaper, or perhaps the devil?
Incanting, thrust, and feast. 13 fangs.
Powerful, the whirlpool of magical energy felt almost like an underground cyclone. Though it was incredibly small in size, the magnitude of the winds was comparable to that of an actual windstorm. The magical energy sliced through the roof of the cavern and began to spin in the opposite direction, slowly converging inside the lance. No matter what we had up our sleeves, it was too late. The words to unleash its name had already come from beneath the mask. In the instant when she was about to unleash the full power of the noble phantasm, I heard a small cracking noise. We did not make that noise. It didn't come from Bazak and Illumia, who had been fighting before then, or from the large number of bone soldiers. It came from a corner of one of the walls of the cavern. This sound, which was incongruent with the noble phantasm that was about to be unleashed, attracted our attention. Father Fernando stood there, staring blankly at that corner of the wall as a crack appeared there. The crack grew quickly, bringing about a strange rumbling and an unexpected phenomenon.
It's 'cause of the swamps nearby, isn't it? The lance's power had already loosened the dirt around here, and it's completely collapsed now, huh?
More strange noises sounded along with the cheerful laughter. It didn't just come from one place. Had the breakdown caused a chain reaction? The water rushed in from every direction, filling the cavern. The bone soldiers and the priest were swept away immediately. Faced with the rising waters, the knight beside me suddenly picked me up. Sir Kay?
Walled on tight? Though swordplay's not my forte, I'm quite confident in my ability to do this. Or you could say that in terms of making a run for it, I'm the best out of all the knights. Especially when water's involved. Oi, that mage over there as well. Come over here.
In the short moment before the noble phantasm was unleashed, the knight held on to me and jumped into the water. We were swallowed by the violent torrents, and though it was impossible to tell which way was up, the knight never loosened his grip on me.
To make sure I didn't get swept away, his body contorted to an unusual position, so strange that I couldn't imagine that a regular person could pull them off. Before the cold water took my consciousness from me, I thought I heard something.
Hi. How troublesome you are, idiot Gray.
It was said that you could tell a person's personality from their voice, Some were kind and calm, others were cold and harsh, multiple factors combined forming someone's personality. Voices were the same. If that was the case then, the voice that spoke then was probably an exception.
How surprising.
Analytical from the world themselves, it seemed as if he was surprised. However, his voice did not contain a trace of emotion, like a cask of wine that had been left to age for too long, causing its colours to be over-complex and to blend into a monotonous black. It was Zepia. He slowly turned.
You two were tampering with the parameters of the reenactment just then, yes.
The two people in question were, of course, the two teenagers, Flat and Svin, the twin juggernauts of the El-Melloi classroom, the blonde and blue-eyed duo. The two of them were currently in the mysterious space, watching the reenactment with Zepia. Just then, the image of Grey and the others being swallowed by the flood had been displayed through the floating crystal balls. One of the two, Flat, smiled innocently.
Careful! Think about it. The village is right next to the swamp, so there's got to be a water source. And just at that moment, the foundations decided to collapse because it couldn't withstand the impact of the battle, and a flood happened. In theory, there's nothing out of the ordinary about that kind of coincidence, is there? The structure of that place is pretty unnatural anyway. Let me think. That means that we can use this method to mess with this place that looks like the past, right?
Indeed. However, you must first find out the coordinates and precise time the Logos React is operating on for that. Even if you are the abnormalities who can hack into the technology of the Atlas Institute, it is not that easy to discover these parameters. My calculations are done by my brain alone, because nothing here can assist you in that.
In analytical, Zepia shifted his gaze to the many crystal balls that floated in the air around him. All the crystal balls here are connected to that stage. Even in the present moment, the ways in which they are connected are constantly changing. Causes and effects form links with different parameters and increases to infinity. If you want to, in your words, hack into it, you must find possible times, causes and effects, and connect them together. It's comparable to looking for a single gemstone in an endless desert. Perhaps it could also be compared to an endless amount of keyholes. Many keys were in the space, and though Flat had the ability to forge the key, only one keyhole was correct. There was no way to explain how they found this keyhole through Flat's talents alone.
That was what Zepia wanted to ask about. However, you succeeded. How?
Since they had already been found out, there was no point in continuing to hide it. They had started setting up this spell just then. If Zepia really wanted to know, he would probably easily be able to tell what they were up to. Instead of that, he'd much rather stand proudly and proclaim it himself. He might even get more information that way.
Proud though you say they must be calculated, I can smell anything, even weaknesses and flaws. I don't know if it's because it's not meant to be perceived that way, but scent is the magecraft that my family has developed for generations. And I am the result of their work. To tell the truth though, Sven didn't like this about himself. He silently recalled what had happened when he first met Flat. It wasn't a pleasant memory at all, because both of them saw it at once that the other was just as defective and inferior as they were themselves. Sir, this guy smells like an absolute mess. Can I get rid of him? That was the first thing that I had said. Back then, I had just gotten used to the classroom, and I had thought that this person would probably endanger my teacher, Lord El-Melloi II. It was inevitable that I would think about obliterating him as I had just arrived at the clock tower. Perhaps you could say that it was a perfectly normal thought for a mage. From this angle, I had degraded quite a bit. Even now, I still did not believe that my original presumptions were wrong. Flatus Cardos was an outstanding troublemaker, even among the students of the El-Melloi classroom. His extraordinary talents and personality could not be controlled by anyone. I didn't even know how many problems Flat had caused since then. It went without saying that he was a problem for my teacher, but the other students, including me, had all suffered significantly to clean up his problems. Dash, however, I thought.
Basically, you're saying that the two of you cooperated to achieve this?
How is the... I did the intervention? Ha! Svainkun's pretty cool, isn't he? He was also the one who told me that Sir Kay had the ability to hold his breath underwater for days on end.
Flat raised his hand and patted his classmate's shoulder vigorously. He said it as if he was cheering someone on in a sports competition. It was impossible to imagine that the person who said that was actually facing, or perhaps was in the midst of a life or death situation. Though mages constantly found themselves in extraordinary situations, perhaps it was because of that they were unusually sensitive about their own lives. Just like Svin had once judged, Flat was an extremely twisted person. At first glance, he just looked like someone who lacked empathy, analytical for a mage who was outside the norm by default. Perhaps he might even be called a pacifist. However, this teenager could not be... Just in terms of history, the Escardos family, which Flat belonged to, was said to have existed for at least 1800 years. It was impossible for a bloodline that predated even many of the Lord families to produce normal, carefree children. Even after long years of study in the El-Melloi classroom and a large amount of contact with others, such a deep and fatal deficiency was hard to erase. Dash, however, the two of them thought.
How incredible. Please excuse my directness, but the two of you are still far from the rank of Brand. However, finding my weaknesses would be difficult for even a Lord of the Clock Tower.
Analytical, he definitely did not underestimate. The conclusion made by the director of the Atlas Institute was the result of a precise evaluation of their abilities. Even though they were the prodigies of the El-Melloi classroom, the Mages Association was a place where geniuses were gathered through generations of cooperation and inhumane selection methods. There was no way to compete with truly high-ranking figures like the lords of the three great families, with incredible talent and an efficient education alone.
However, if the two of you cooperate, everything becomes different. It is not as simple as addition or multiplication. The way of being itself transforms.
Sepia slowly steepled his fingers. His hands were as still as a butterfly's wings, and he closed his eyes. He seemed to be evaluating the teenagers once more. Flat elbowed his classmate and smiled. Those words were incredibly arrogant. However, they were well supported. Actually, it was only because of their crushing defeat at the Twin Towers of Il-Sema that they had been able to advance further. If this change was not acknowledged, was there any purpose of improving at all, as mages of extraordinary talent? Dash, and then. For that reason, Sepia mused.
Confident, aren't you? If that is the case, I was mistaken. The past is a stage. They are the actors. And I thought that I was the playwright that was here to simply observe the play. Ah, yes. There are often many playwrights in a troupe. Only through mutual consultation can the story truly soar to a realm beyond what a single person can achieve. To think that I forgot this kind of common sense.
A strange colour began to spread on Zepia's face. Zepia slowly pondered his colour, which had finally returned to him after decades, or perhaps centuries, and shifted his gaze back to the teenagers. He straightened his posture, as if he was a grand master who had realized that his opponent was more than a neophyte after multiple chess moves.
Come on, my foes. Who shall this story be composed by?
The teenagers who had just been named as foes swallowed at the same time. Scents were often present in my dreams. The soft smell of boiled potatoes told me that it was around more than 10 years ago. Back then, mashed potatoes were a regular part of my family's dinner, and I often complained because I had grown sick of eating it. My father was usually the one cooking at the time, and he spoiled me more than my mother did. For that reason, he spent a lot of effort thinking of what to cook, and even especially ordered ingredients for Chinese and Japanese food from the travelling merchants. The two of us had then attempted to cook the dishes according to the second-hand recipes in our hands. I recalled tasting a dish so spicy I'd run circles around the yard with my father, making my mother laugh, transforming into King Arthur's body, being revered by the villagers, and having everything in my life controlled, was after that. Yes. That was why I had always thought it was my own fault. My fault that I had become the body that was revered by my parents and the villagers. Because of that, after I was chosen by Bazak to become a gravekeeper, I tried to busy myself with that job as much as possible after I could freely enter the graveyard. Though I hated the dead, it was better than being worshipped by the living. When I faced the spirits that would appear periodically, though I felt terror from the depths of my heart, I also felt somewhat comforted. Comforted because even if I died, and became one of them, it would be better than my life in this village. I thought of this. But I never died. There were too many contradictions. Even when I arrived in London and became my mentor's disciple, I had not been able to get over all the complicated mess of interpersonal relations and how I had been served with amazingly delicious tea and desserts. For that reason, meeting the Husk King was incredibly important to me. I wanted to know how she regarded her own existence. The answer that I received was so clear and unambiguous that it struck me with an indescribably amount of force. What should I do? Should I obediently give up my body? No, I didn't think so. If it was the me of the past, I might have made this choice easily. However, now, someone would definitely feel sad if I chose that option. If that was the case, then, a low moan sounded in the church above the surface, beneath the shattered panes of stained glass.
What happened?
The old woman's voice shook. It seemed to be the first time the other villagers had heard the old woman make such a sound. A slight uneasiness began to spread.
What happened to you, mind of the king?
The old woman spread her arms and pleaded as she stood at the altar. However, her hands fell in dismay, perhaps because she received no answer. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. She looked almost like a martyr from millennia ago.
Concerned grandmother, what happened?
Among them, many were still collapsed on the ground, unable to stand up. This was because they had given too much of their ode to the Husk King beneath the ground, though she hadn't unleashed it. Simply manifesting her noble phantasm had great costs. Now, around a quarter of the villagers were rendered immobile.
Contact with the mind of the king has been broken. She became agitated after meeting Grey and seemed to have wanted to unleash her noble phantasm.
Analytical, the old woman was not an actual mage. Though she could sense the state of the Husk King through magecraft passed down through generations, she could not discern the precise situation. Therefore, she was completely oblivious to their conversation.
Would never get into any trouble. It's just the connection being severed. The flood could never harm her. Since there was a flood there, perhaps the other problem can also be solved. However, Grey managed to escape. This matter must not be ignored.
In response to the old woman's worries, someone gave an obvious answer.
Can't we just catch her and bring her back? The king is only a third of herself, so it's only normal for her to be confused. Therefore, we must help her resolve her worries.
It was Grey's mother. She stroked her long hair with her fingers and smiled. An indescribable light shone in her unfocused eyes.
Please let me handle it. I am the person who has been with the body of King Arthur the longest, after all. Yes, I know better than anyone no matter how we chase her. In the end, that child will never choose to run away.
As if to confirm what the mother had just said, the old woman narrowed her eyes, burying them in a pile of wrinkles.
Decisive, I see. All right, I shall leave it to you.
And grateful, thank you very much.
Grey's mother bowed her head.
I allow you all to approach the swamp, though from the look of the flood, the bounded field has probably already been destroyed. Since the Holy Church has already declared themselves to be an enemy of ours, we do not have any time to waste.
Ominous next, the old woman took out a curved dagger. It looked considerably old,
and some parts of the metal engravings had been damaged. Perhaps because it was cared for well, or maybe for some other reason, the gold shone as if it was proud to say it still retained its glory.
Reverent erosion. Neither the church nor the grave keepers know of its existence. It is our treasured mystic code given to us by our Holy Mother for the purpose of reviving King Arthur.
The old woman stared at the dagger, transfixed, as if to say that she was born for this very reason. According to what she said, the village had been divided into 2 factions, each one keeping its own secrets. One was the Blackmoors, the lineage of mages that guided souls and guarded the graveyard from thousands of years ago. The other was the group who wished for King Arthur's return. The devotees of the Black Madonna and King Arthur, such as the old woman who had inherited the dagger. Actually, most villages didn't belong to either faction. Though most of the villagers were focused on the resurrection of King Arthur now, some of them would be chosen periodically to be grave keepers, and others were fanatical believers in the Black Madonna. The role of the grave keepers had never been at odds with the revival of King Arthur, but both sides kept secrets from and held grudges against each other. And then one day, the Holy Church also joined, assimilating the Black Madonna with the Holy Mother of their own religion, and used that as a reason to take root here. Though it looked as if they got along harmoniously, they watched each other in private. For this village of less than 100 people, this was far too much history, to the point that some people might tire of it.
This blade was forged to cut through not only flesh, but also the spaces between the body, mind, and the soul. When used for sacrifices, our Holy Mother was said to have used this dagger to dye the sacrificer's heart. According to legend, it can also transform into a scythe, or even a sword. After we have captured Grey, all we need to do is stab her with this dagger. Then her pitiful mind and soul can be briefly separated from her body. Next, we shall bind the mind of the king to the body as much as possible. For the soul, all we can do is wait for that Holy Grail war. We must live until that time. It doesn't matter how many heroic spirits there are. As long as the mind and body are reunited here, the soul of the king must be summoned. Such a degree of luck will definitely favor our king.
Ominous, the old woman's laughter did not cease. Grey's mother stared at the dagger with a mesmerized smile, and the other villagers were still collapsed on the floor. The Black Madonna still stared down at them with the same unchanging expression it always had. Though I felt cold, the wind that blew across my face told me that it was only caused by my body temperature. I was in the middle of a lush forest. Though the sun had not risen yet, there was a faint glow in the horizon. It appeared that we had spent quite some time underground. It would probably take a few more minutes for me to fully register the fact that I was outside. I seemed to have had a dream. I couldn't remember what it was about, but it felt like a nostalgic one.
You're awake.
An unnaturally hazy face stared down at me. I recalled that it was because he said he had not completely materialized and blinked. Sergei.
It's good that you remember my name. You choked on a lot of water, after all. According to experience, if you don't breathe for long enough, your mind goes all funny. If I were to use the knowledge of this era, it's called brain damage, isn't it?
He sat down on the ground, laughing, and not caring if his armor got dirty at all. In the light of the early morning, he looked incredibly mysterious. No, why was I thinking of mysteriousness? He was a knight from the distant past that had been summoned to the present. That was mystery, the real thing. It was the first time this truth sank in. As I coughed, I felt my consciousness gradually return to me. I sat up hastily. Panicked. Where is he? Only realized that my mentor was lying there when I looked in the direction the knight jerked his chin in. His long wet hair was spread out on the ground around him, and his already unhealthy-looking face was even paler. Water was dripping from the hem of his suit.
Understood. Submissive, that guy's got even worse stamina than you do. He's out cold, though, so he probably didn't choke on that much water.
I hurried over to him and extended a hand toward his face. The moment I felt an exhale escape his lips, relief surged forth from the bottom of my heart, and I collapsed beside him. How strange, I thought. When I first arrived in London, I had thought that he was such an annoying person. How did I end up feeling this way? Though my brain was still not working properly, I knew the answer straight away. It was because I had changed, and I was slightly happy as I thought of that. Because even though this face belonged to someone else, the mind that never stopped growing and changing was undoubtedly my own. Even though eternity does not exist in this world, it was still true that it would continue to change forever. If that was the case, I suppose that one day I would be able to stand up in a place where nobody else was, because the person formed through the accumulated change was my true self. That same person told me of my own existence. I exhaled deeply.
Casual, pleased? Dash, take this,
the knight said as he handed my scythe to me. Thank you.
This is my current vessel after all. Take good care of it.
You saved us, right?
Unboasting even from me, trying to swim while lugging 2 people around is absolutely exhausting. You'd better thank me properly. After I managed to swim up, I found a tunnel in the back that leads here. I don't know if the flood loosened the dirt, but the moment I got out, it collapsed.
The hazy knight irritatedly fanned at his wet hair with his hands. He had probably swam up here with his armor on, though he was a spiritual being, Meph, and his armor wouldn't necessarily retain its original weight. It was probably physically impossible to escape from a flood while dragging 2 people along. On top of that, he had found my scythe. I couldn't imagine how he was able to carry it. I didn't think that was a question that could be answered by simply attributing it to the fact that he was a heroic spirit. Amazingly, though, I could accept it. Before I lost my consciousness, I had felt myself get picked up by an arm. The motions with which that arm sliced through the water felt almost like they came from a different dimension. I got the feeling that I was holding onto a dolphin instead of an arm.
Understood. The only thing I've ever been good at is swimming. Though I say that, this kind of skill's got nothing to do with the reputation I had as a knight. Thanks to that, I used to constantly get comments from my colleagues saying how weird I was.
True, it didn't seem like it would further his reputation. However, I felt like it suited this mental model pain. Very well, more than skill in sword fighting or magecraft would. I didn't know why, but it made me feel a sense of relief.
Casual, that old guy swam off on his own to another tunnel, though.
What about the Husk King?
Nonchalant. Who knows? She isn't someone who'll get affected by that much water anyway.
That was true. Even I would probably be able to get out of there alive if I was able to strengthen myself properly. Finally, I had recovered enough to examine my surroundings. I was surrounded by trees on all sides. There was also a thin veil of fog. However, since I had lived here for many years, I still had a basic grasp of where I was. We're probably a little bit up the mountain from the village. I think we're a bit further than the other end of the swamp.
The tunnel goes pretty far then, doesn't it?
That's probably the case. Yes. That cavern was pretty large after all. In retrospect, it was a miracle that the entire ground didn't collapse on us when she almost unleashed the dark Rongominiad. I couldn't help but shudder at that thought. I didn't know if it was due to fear or my body temperature. Just as I sank into thought, I felt something touch my damp hood, and I looked up in curiosity. Suddenly, the hand began to move back and forth across my head. Please don't. My hair will get messy. Andam smiled, as if he just saw something funny.
Understood you aren't like that guy at all, but maybe you'll get along well with Gareth. You're sort of related to that bunch anyway.
I had a strange impression of that name. That's of the Round Table. The knight said, feigning ignorance and looking away. My mentor was lying on the ground, looking weakly at us. I felt my body temperature rise instantly. Baby, it really did increase by a couple of degrees. I shouted as if I had finally dislodged something from my throat.
Weak? Gray?
Yes, I'm here. Seeing my mentor look up at me, I suddenly wanted to cry. Why did I become such a crybaby? I held tightly onto his hand. I was so glad that my hood was on, I thought. If I cried right now, it would probably bother him. Though I knew that, I still felt the back of my throat heat up uncontrollably. Sir?
Weary? What? Don't look at me with such a weird expression.
My mentor glanced at his fingers, which were being tightly held, and smiled wryly. Next, he gathered up his wet hair and sat up. He took off his dripping suit jacket and carefully extracted his box of cigars from the pocket. He carefully wiped water off its surface and then opened it. It seemed that the container was quite waterproof, as the inside was still dry. It could also have been the effect of some kind of magecraft. He took out a cigar with one hand and held a knife in the other. Perhaps because of the cold, my mentor's fingers were frozen, so I gently took the knife from him and helped him cut off the tip. However, the matches got wet, so my mentor had to snap in order to start a fire. Smoke wreathed around the cigar as it slowly burnt. I felt as if it had been ages since I had smelled its scent. When I first arrived in London, I didn't like the smell very much. Even now, if someone else was smoking, I would have thought that it was unpleasant, though I wouldn't have much else to say about it. However, whenever my mentor lit a cigar, I got a strange feeling, as if I was wrapped up in my favorite blanket.
So, we were washed up. No, you swam to the swamp area, yes?
Strud, proud you'd better thank me properly.
Questioning, what do you mean by that?
I'm asking what we should do next, of course. We just barely managed to escape. It took a fluke on top of a fluke to get us out there alive. If that same thing happened 100 more times, we'd probably die 100 times,
said the knight, casually mentioning certain death. The air with which he said those words reminded me of ancient battlefields. The only reason why he could say something like that was because he was a true warrior of this land.
Understood. Pragmatic life is the most valuable thing to human beings, after all. It's not too late to run, is it?
If you assume that escape is even possible, I still don't think this is actually the past. If it isn't, do you think that there will be an outside to this village at all?
Skeptical. You mean nothing will be outside this village? Sounds like something out of a fairy tale.
In the end, the person making this choice isn't me anyway.
After he said that, my mentor exhaled a puff of smoke and looked toward me. Huh?
Gray, what do you think? I've asked you something similar before. This is your case, after all.
My case. This was the first time someone had said something like that to me. Though I had been involved in multiple cases along with my mentor before, I was only ever my mentor's disciple, and nothing else. However, this was different. This was a case that happened in my hometown, and a sequel to the first case. It was the reason why I had left my village, and a truth that I had to face. The underground temple. Another Black Madonna, the revival of King Arthur, and most importantly, the mind of King Arthur, the Husk King. Or perhaps another me. She didn't listen to what I had to say. I confessed quietly. It wasn't enough. My words and my experiences were not enough to move her. I needed to talk to her in order to know the truth, and in order to know what I was. However, my words were too shallow, and I hadn't been able to reach the Husk King's heart. It was all because I was too immature. I hopelessly pondered my own uselessness, and how much danger I had brought upon the people around me. But, if you would allow it, sir, I still want to meet her again.
Then, as your teacher, I shall have to assist you. If I denied my disciples' requests, it would damage the reputation of the El-Melloi name.
Thank you. I nodded as hard as I could. I knew that what he said about the El-Melloi name was just an excuse. But, because of that, my mentor's encouragement was fully conveyed to me.
You weren't the only one whose words fell on deaf ears. If I didn't make you say all those unnecessary things, she wouldn't have unleashed her noble phantasm either.
Well, I recalled the Husk King's furious face when I had passed on my mentor's message. Actually, before that point I could feel that she had been showing some mercy. Even though she wanted to restrain me, it didn't seem like she wanted to hurt me excessively. If that was the case, what part of my mentor's words had she not been able to take? Muttering, I don't know why, but the Husk King seems to know what a reenactment is. If that's the case, she probably won't do the same thing she did during the first cycle. The goal right in front of our eyes was to solve the case of the past. Find the mystery that you must solve, Sepia had said. We had thought that this was the way that we could escape this second cycle, or perhaps a clue. However, because of the events that had just played out, our plans had drastically deviated from that. However,
Muttering, perhaps her reaction is the key.
the key?
I'm not sure either, but there's a sense of dissonance. I prepared the message to utilize the dissonance as much as possible, but I never thought she would react that violently. I'm incredibly ashamed of myself. I was so close to making her listen.
My mentor hunched over and thought. I knew that he would often stay this way for a long time. Once, he had forgotten to eat for an entire day when he was writing a thesis, and ended up having to drag himself out of his room in a complete state of disarray. However, before he could sink into thought, someone spoke.
Hey! Can I interrupt you for a second?
And Stoadnide what?
Nothing really. I've just noticed something. Doesn't that part look funny?
The knight pointed in a direction. It was a patch of ground in the forest. It seemed to be frequented by wild animals, so the grass had parted to reveal some soil. Looking at that otherwise unassuming bit of dirt, I also sensed that something was off. This is... I extended my hand, and the moist ground in front of us sank slightly. My mentor noticed it as well, and frowned.
Questioning, are those human footprints?
Analytical, I bent over and inspected the ground at an angle. It was a hunting technique that Bazak had taught me. Footprints were difficult to examine from a standing position, so you needed to bend over in order to discern the state and direction of the footprints. From the size of the prints, I could tell that they were probably left by a man. He was wearing leather shoes, unlike the villagers, and his steps were uneven, as if he wasn't used to walking on mountain roads.
Observant, we're close to the swamp now, and according to the rules, the villagers won't approach this area.
I nodded in response to my mentor's words. This wasn't a place where people would usually leave their footprints, so there must be some sort of meaning to it. Let's take a look, I said naturally, as a strange feeling rose in my heart. If such a thing like the threads of fate did indeed exist, it was a feeling as if we had just been captured by lines that hung from the sky. Though we were not puppets, our destination had just been decided by those threads, I thought, though I didn't know why I was so certain. Mysterious, a voice rang out from somewhere.
If a coincidence happens once, it will naturally become interlocked with the next coincidence. When luck deviates, some kind of counterproductive effect is bound to occur before the possibility is closed off. This has nothing to do with cliché ideas of whether someone is lucky or not. It's simply the phenomenon of how a pendulum is more prone to extremes after a force is applied to it before it returns to its natural resting place.
The emotionless voice explained the situation as if it were a lecture. Presently they were looking down at how the events had unfolded. Lord El-Melloi II and Grey had entered the forest, and had coincidentally found the footprints. They had seen all of this.
You're trying to say that this is karma, right? It's a pretty important concept in Eastern thought, isn't it? Something around the lines of, if you help a crane in the morning, it'll come give you better deer in video games at night.
It was the voice of a teenager. There wasn't a hint of fear in the teenager's voice, to the point where someone might wonder how much he actually understood about his situation. In response to his words, the classmate sitting beside him was speechless, momentarily before he answered in as calm of a voice as he could muster.
And is it better to ask questions when you still have the chance? Aren't things like whether you should spread butter or jam on bread the key?
How is that even related?
he yelled, gritting his teeth like an angry beast. His classmates' response still carried some confusion.
Oh, it isn't. Wait, are they all right because they popped out into the swamp from beneath the ground? Or is that place outside of the bounded field?
They had passed that same bounded field and had ended up in this space as a result.
Just watch. Let us see how the vortex has changed because of your intervention. And let us find out what awaits them there, at the end of the change.
We walked for about 10 minutes along the footprints, and a small hut hidden in the foliage appeared.
Ha! I didn't know that there'd be something like this here.
The knight said, shocked? It was a small, scrappily built hut, a bit smaller than the one Bazak lived in. Perhaps because it was in the middle of the forest, about half of the wood on the outside had rotted, to the point where it was surprising that it hadn't collapsed yet.
It seems that the decaying walls have been reinforced with some kind of magecraft,
my mentor said, gingerly touching the wall. Magecraft?
muttering, "It might have been placed here intentionally for us to find."
He muttered and nodded to confirm what I had just said. We cautiously opened the door and entered the hut. My mentor stepped gently onto the decaying wooden floor and looked around, making sure that nothing like the bone soldiers we had encountered earlier would attack us from the shadows. I was also on high alert, keeping my eyes wide open and staying by my mentor's side. In the entrance area, there was a regular-looking set of tables and chairs. However, as we stepped further into the room, we discovered something that made me widen my eyes in shock.
What's that?
The voice of the knight came from behind me. An entire wall had been covered by a large amount of notes and pictures, which had been connected by strings of assorted colours. The combination looked almost like the patterns of magic circuits. My mentor blinked and said a name.
Analytical, this is an evidence board.
An evidence board?
Explaining, it appears a lot in crime dramas. It's a tool for visually organizing thoughts, ideas, and complex events through notes and photographs by connecting related pieces of.
Hearing his explanation, I somewhat recalled seeing one somewhere. No dust had gathered on top of the photos or the string, so it hadn't been long since this was made. Because I heard that it was a tool for organizing thoughts, I felt as if I was looking through someone else's brain. Observant, the photos that'd been pinned up showed the village from various angles. There were wide shots of the Black Madonna and the graveyard, each with notes that looked like records of observations. The strings were probably also related to the observations somehow. My mentor's gaze lingered on one of the lines of notes. What is it?
Nothing dismissive. Nothing. The person who made this evidence board was also looking into the 3 essential parts of a human being.
So, the body, the mind, and the soul. Words. The true form of the masked girl, and I, as well as the reason why we had been created.
Analytical. It follows the theory that I've been thinking about for a while. No, it's a lot more detailed than my theory. This person's research goes deeper than just figuring out how grey is the body of King Arthur, and how the mind might exist underground.
My mentor traced his fingers along the strings, as if he was trying to imitate the mind of the person who had created this evidence board. I didn't know why, but I felt a flurry of panic, not only because this so-called evidence board was related to me, but also because of the fact that both my mentor and the person who created this had thought of the same thing. It made me feel an indescribable amount of fear. Yes, fear. I was afraid of this wall of evidence. If the situation allowed for it, I would have curled up into a ball and screamed. The photos depicted my hometown from all sorts of angles, dissecting it up into chunks and revealing what I didn't even notice, though I had lived here for years and years. I knew that I wasn't able to gather anything important from it, but the way in which the information was displayed still gave me an eerie feeling. It almost gave me the feeling of a dissolution rather than a dissection.
I didn't think that we'd be able to see this kind of hard work so easily.
Analytical, hearing the knight's words, my mentor shook his head.
Oh, I don't think the person who created this tried to hide it at all. First, according to the rules of the village, Nobody would reach the other side of the swamp anyway. They've probably also put up a bounded field accordingly, but nobody could have guessed that someone like us would get swept around in a flood and come up from under the ground.
Understood.
The knight said, nodding. Beside him, my mentor continued.
There's another possibility. Perhaps there wasn't enough time to conceal this place properly.
There wasn't enough time?
Observant look at the kitchen.
He didn't turn around. He just pointed in that direction.
Analytical, there are still some freshly ground coffee beans there. Whoever was here probably planned on drinking it when they came back later. Maybe they were the mere practical sort of person who cared less about the taste and more about how easy it was to prepare the drink. Either way, I think they planned on returning immediately after they left, but never got the chance.
The way you say that makes you sound more like a detective than a mage.
Self-deprecating, if I relied on my skills as a mage alone, I wouldn't be able to get anywhere.
My mentor said somewhat self-deprecatingly, and then turned to look at the evidence board again. He flipped through some papers that had been stapled together, and for a couple of minutes he froze. Worried, are you all right? He did not respond immediately.
Is that the case? Is that the case? Fuck!
Shocked along with the curse word which would occasionally slip from his mouth, my mentor punched the wall. Though, with the strength he had, he probably wouldn't have managed to hurt himself seriously. I widened my eyes in surprise at the act.
Realizing Rains and I didn't notice at the time, but someone we know was also there. Unfortunately, he left before we got involved in the reenactment.
Analytical. He began carefully flipping through the papers again. He was probably computing a large number of formulas and trying to imprint them into his brain. His eyes scanned across file after file until he finally came to a conclusion.
It's heartless.
Huh? I couldn't help but ask rhetorically. For that reason, my mentor repeated the name once again.
The person who created this evidence board was the former head of the Department of Modern Magecraft, Norwich, Dr. Heartless.
Right. The reason why he had returned to this village was that he wanted to find more clues about Heartless.
I had completely forgotten about this because of the absurdity of our previous encounters. First, I had been shocked by the fact that the village was abandoned, and then because we had been transported to the past. I never thought that we would end up returning to our original goal. If that was the case, this was...
Analytical. That makes sense. Though Zepia said that he made a deal with Heartless, the villagers never mentioned anyone like Heartless. If that's because Heartless never got to the village at all, everything would be explained. It looks as if he observed the village for quite a while.
Wait, why would Heartless spend time to research this village? You said just then that he was looking into the body, the mind, and the soul. So what do these papers actually say?
Analytical. Let me see. Most of them are theses, and there are also some spells.
My mentor shifted his gaze to the evidence board once more. I was absolutely terrified. Ever since my mentor had found this evidence board, uneasiness had assailed my mind, and the fear had only increased further upon learning that the person who created it was Heartless. It was almost as if my mentor was confronting an enemy on a battlefield, where I was completely helpless. The constant panic made me feel as if my throat was constricting. The more he examined the evidence board, the scarier my mentor's gaze looked. Sir?
Heartless was trying to interfere with the spell that the village was planning to cast.
Is it like what Flat does? I recalled how the teenager would easily mess around with other people's magecraft, though I had heard stories of how Flat had infiltrated top-secret clock tower meetings many times before. Every time I brought up the details, my mentor would frown and put his hand over his stomach.
No, Flat's approach just relies on his own talents to tap into things and to counter them. This is far more elaborate and well thought out.
At that, he put one hand on the evidence board, and his eyes continued to wander about. After a while, he bowed his head in defeat and groaned quietly.
It's pointless. I can't understand this.
You... can't? I was shocked. This was the first time I had seen my mentor talk in such a demoralized way at a time like this. I never thought that my mentor, who took apart other people's magecraft as casually as he breathed and had even gotten into several crises because of it, would not be able to understand someone's magecraft.
Frustrated, I can comprehend the general idea. The formula is derived from Celtic spiritualism and witchcraft, and the spell used for interference is based on modern magecraft and witchcraft, with some Italia's alchemy mixed in. I can understand up to this point. However, the structure of the spell is so delicate that it is difficult to deduce its exact effects. There are thousands of numbers that need to be taken into consideration. If even one of them is wrong, or if the thickness of a single line was misread, it'll lead to a completely different result.
My mentor said, pointing at the intricate lines on the notes on the evidence board. It wasn't just a page or two. There were dozens of sheets stuck there, and each of them had a different scribbled pattern. Some of them resembled an angel's wings, others looked like ancient crowns, others had illustrations of star polygons, while others still had conglomerates of large amounts of strange shapes.
It's like if you made a tiny edit to a landscape painting and accidentally turned it into a painting of a different country altogether. There's no uniformity whatsoever. It should be impossible, but somehow, with his amazing persistence and excellent skill, he somehow forced it to mesh together. Ah, is this the true ability of Dr. Heartless, who supported the Lordless Department of Modern Magecraft, Norwich, back then?
The head of the Department of Modern Magecraft before my mentor. A corner of his ability was clearly displayed in front of our eyes.
Frustrated if you had a brain like Zeppia's, or perhaps first-rate magic circuits like Luvia Gelita's, it would be possible to continue developing the foundation in the same general direction. However, neither my brain nor my magic circuits are capable of that sort of calculation.
Those words were too bitter. No matter how many times he faced it, he would not be able to give up, would he? Even more so if he had realized long ago that this was his specialty.
Wistful, at least if the Volumen Hydri Grum was here.
Are you asking for me?
Suddenly, a human figure appeared by the door. Not even the vigilant knight, Sir Kay, noticed her presence, and he yelled loudly, leaping backward in surprise. I suppose that reaction was warranted, since a liquid had just suddenly taken on a human form after it slipped through the door crack. I widened my eyes in surprise as I looked at the silver person. Trimo?
Here's looking at you, kid.
I couldn't help but blink many times in quick succession at the Mercury maid, who expressionlessly said what appeared to be a movie quote.
Why are you here?
Formal yesterday, Miss Raines ordered me to return to this village on the journey back to London. She told me to try not to get noticed by her older brother, to lend him a helping hand in case he encountered anything dangerous, and to make him feel as indebted to her as possible. Those were her orders. Since I could not find any trace of you, I was on standby mode, but I detected your reaction just then and came as quickly as I could.
Speechless, I was rendered speechless. My mentor had the same reaction and covered his face with his hands. And then he laughed happily.
Amused, does that mean she did this during the first cycle as well?
His voice carried some resignation, but also some joy. She had probably watched my mentor from a distance in the first cycle as well, and then, when she made sure that no danger came of him, she had quietly returned with my mentor and I, when we left the village. It sounds like something Miss Raines would do. Wistful, I could feel the thoughtfulness that she had left behind seeping into my heart. If I told her that, though, she would probably look at me with a strange expression. I wanted to go back, I thought. I wanted to go back to the table where the girl was waiting. I wanted to eat desserts, drink tea, and complain about my mentor together. Though the conversation would probably peter out quickly because of my stupid mouth, I would still have an extremely enjoyable time. But What can Trimmal help you with?
Finding contracted volumen hydrargyrum is the mystic code that used to belong to my teacher, Lord El-Melloi Archibald.
This name, which I would occasionally hear, surprised me. I had heard that my mentor had something to do with his death in the Fourth Holy Grail War. However, for now, I put aside those thoughts and watched my mentor raise one of his fingers. As he made a hand gesture, as if he was playing an orchestral instrument, Trimmal closed her eyes and also raised her right hand.
Explaining the reason why the mystic code, which he made when he was in his 20s, was regarded as one of the supreme mystic codes of the El-Melloi family, is not only because it can serve as an excellent weapon.
As my mentor spoke, Trimmal's right hand instantly evaporated. I reflexively clamped my hand over my mouth because I was worried about getting poisoned. However, the mercury did not continue to spread in the air. Instead, it condensed again in the air in the shape of a large quantity of numbers.
Explaining the volumen hydrargyrum can also function as the El-Melloi faction's leading computational machine, though only a small portion of its power can be used under my control.
I had no idea that Trimmal had these kinds of hidden capabilities. The numbers and symbols floating in the air changed, disorienting me. I still could not understand the relationship between the numbers and symbols that my mentor had described. However, my mentor's gaze was extremely serious, and every time the numbers changed, by looking at it, I could glimpse the emotions circling in his heart. For instance, agitation, jealousy, longing, maybe even anger, or perhaps an emotion that was a mixture of all of the above. What I saw did not tell me who Heartless was, but instead, what my mentor thought of him.
Realizing, is that the case? This spell is a continuation of that one. He wasn't concerned with either one of the body, the mind, or the soul. Instead, he wanted to know how they can be preserved or deteriorated.
And, mentor said that? He kept on looking between the evidence board and the numbers, and moving his fingers. This time, the numbers began to turn into the patterns and pentagrams drawn on the notes. They then turned to patterns like the sun, the moon, stars, scales, fish, and mountain goats. I suppose that, to a mage, those symbols were like a scientist's equations. At the same time, my mentor, who was surrounded by those symbols, looked like a melancholy philosopher. Finally, the transformation stopped. It looked as if the words on the mercury had reached some sort of conclusion. In the space of a few seconds, my mentor froze. What's wrong, sir?
I think I found the answer. However...
Sir? After a brief silence, he whirled around abruptly.
Sergeant Trimmo, how long is there until sunrise?
Formal. If sunrise is defined as a sun completely rising above the horizon, there are approximately 37 to 43 minutes.
Urgent. Then we need to get out of here immediately.
A mentor rapidly turned the floating mercury back into Trimmer's right hand and let his jacket flutter in the air behind him. I caught up to him hurriedly.
Urgent, we need to get to the swamp. I'm sorry, there's no time to explain now. Let's first get running.
Teasing, hey, are you sure you're not going to collapse midway?
However, his expression became serious the moment he stepped out of the hut.
Really in for the kill, aren't they?
What do you mean, Sake?
Whatever. The villagers looked like they were going to come sooner or later anyway. They must have gone through a great deal of trouble.
He replied flippantly, as if he couldn't bother to spend more effort explaining. I gradually heard it too, a sound coming from the foot of the mountain, in other words, the direction of the village towards the swamp.
Muttering, maybe the villagers sensed that something was wrong and started doing an all-out search of the mountain. Ha! If we're going along this path, there'll be a direct confrontation at the swamp. If we don't make a run for it now, we'll have to stab our friends and relatives, so you'd better make sure you're up to the task.
Midway up the mountainside, a man scaled the slope, walking as if his face was going to fall to the ground. It was Father Fernando. Droplets of water still dripped from his wet cassock. He had been swept into a flood and had just crawled out from a different cave. Even he himself had to marvel at how he was still alive. Perhaps it was because fat isn't very dense. Though he had separated from Sister Illumia, that wasn't a problem.
Weary after all, the only reason why he was now desperately trying to climb the mountain was because an alive and well Sister Illumia had just instructed him to do so, using telepathy. Though the Holy Church prohibited all types of magecraft apart from the baptism rites used by priests, that was just something they said to the outside.
Exarchs like Illumia were taught practical magecraft, such as strengthening and telepathy. Of course, these were all bundled up and given the name of sacraments. It was all just a corner of the knowledge and power the Holy Church had gathered up over time.
Phew. Dragging his sweat-soaked clothing along, Fernando continued to climb upward desperately. On the unpaved dirt, every step caused him to stumble. He grumbled constantly under his breath and nearly fell down many times.
Complaining? What do you mean, go to the swamp? I nearly drowned. Sister Illumia's treating me like her servant or something.
As he hobbled with an expression as if he could collapse and die of exhaustion any minute, he heard a voice.
Are you all right, Father Fernando?
The priest nearly jumped in surprise as he saw a person emerge from the forest. It took him a few seconds to realize who the person was, and he tried to swallow his fear and call out that person's name.
Bersac. Blackmore.
It was the gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard.
B. Bersac. What are you going to do to me?
I have no intent on harming you now,
the gravekeeper said, shaking his head. He still held the giant axe in his hands. The fact that he managed to escape the flood while still holding that axe was a testament to the gravekeeper's physical strength. On the contrary, unlike Illumia, the priest had no other abilities besides reciting baptism rites. As long as Bersac had the intent to do so, the priest would probably be sliced in half like the firewood he chopped every day. Bersac continued to speak with the same calm, emotionless voice as usual.
I just wanted to hear your opinion.
You want to hear my opinion as the gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard?
Perhaps.
The gravekeeper still kept his courteous attitude. It was the same attitude that he had during the countless exchanges they had had back at the village. He wouldn't say much, but he was ultimately respectful. Though the goal of the gravekeeper did not always align with that of the church, they had never been directly at odds with each other. It was a strained relationship. Though they both knew that one day they could become enemies, they were still friendly to each other.
Probing the Holy Church isn't at a consensus either, is it? At least, I don't think so. I've always had my suspicions. Both you and Illumia keep talking to Grey whenever you two have the chance. The nun probably just wants to watch her, but I feel like you think differently. Can you tell me what your reasons for that are?
Evasive. If I just say you imagined it all, you won't accept it, will you?